The Noble Queen, a Shadow Slave Fanfic. Chapter 126 to 150. Noble could not believe her ears. She hadn't killed the monster. The explosion had. Yet, the spell had given her credit for the kill. Did it die of fright? When the device detonated, she had felt a sudden release of her hold on the creature. The professor had assumed this happened simultaneously, but now she realized it must have been a split second sooner. A fallen monster. How is that even possible? The creature was mainly giving the train difficulty because of its thick head and healing ability. Under the pressure of Noble's ability, the abomination's deranged mind collapsed. She could sympathize. She felt like collapsing as well. The damage to her soul from touching the ground as well as the mental strain from using most of her essence had pushed her to the brink. Noble barked a laugh. What? Do you mean lifting a train car repeatedly and then trying to simultaneously hold still a monster while attacking its mind wasn't easy? She thought wryly, trying to keep her mind clear. With a groan, Noble directed herself up the steps of the stationary train. She knocked. Let me in. I can confirm it is dead. A train employee peered through the polymer window at her. His eyes went wide in shock. Once he was sure that she was human, he released the safety lock and allowed her to enter. Do you have a way to contact the engine and let them know to come back for us? Noble eyed the man carefully. He nodded. They should already be backing up. Good. Noble nodded wearily. At least they weren't being abandoned. You don't look so good. Your face is white as a sheet. Noble moved past the worker before he finished speaking. It was rude, but she did not care. Where are you going, ma'am? I need to find my husband. Now. The woman blinked, pulling her eyes under control. How long had they been acting wildly? The man hadn't commented on it, only on the pallor of her face. There was no time to worry about trivial things. Just keep going. In the next car, people were exiting their cabins and checking on each other. At least back here, no one seemed to have been injured. Ma'am, someone with a communicator pushed through the guests. The professor sighed. What now? With a dip of his head, the worker passed the communicator into Noble's hand. Are you the one that ignored protocol and went outside? The person on the screen looked angry. I am. The woman furrowed her brow as the engineer scoffed. We have rules in place for a reason. You could have gotten yourself killed. What were you thinking? I needed to get to my husband. The engineer looked away to give instructions before answering. Your husband was perfectly safe. That's no excuse. We had things in hand before you decided to gallivant and play hero. I could tell you had things well in hand when I had to put the dining car back on the track twice to keep us from derailing. Noble held her throbbing head. I see. The engineer stuttered. Don't leave the train again until we get back to you. Understood. The professor passed the device back to the attendant without saying goodbye. Noble had not considered going outside to get to her room faster. She refrained for two reasons. The awakened felt very weak. If anything happened to her in the open spaces, it was unlikely help would come to her in time. The second was an even bigger reason in her clouded mind. She didn't want to miss her husband when he came this way. There was no doubt in her mind that broken toe or not, Ford was doing his best to get to her. The only thing that would stop the man from finding Noble when he thought she was in trouble was death. And she was in trouble just now. Just a little farther, the floating awakened urged her body forward. The next car was filled with cushioned benches and concerned passengers. They pelted her will with questions. Why are we stopped? What's going on? Is the thing dead? They came in quick succession and overlapped. Noble ignored them all. There was only one person who was going to get her attention just now. At the far end, Noble locked eyes with the most handsome man she had ever seen. He was hobbling with a crutch toward her, an expression of pure relief on his face. The passengers continued to ask questions, but Ford pushed his way through them to get to the woman he loved. I was so worried, he said. Noble wanted to chide him for walking on his hurt foot. She wanted to hug him and cry as he comforted her. She wanted to say so many things. But all of that would have to wait. Within the safety of her husband's embrace, Noble's body had reached its limit. Help me, she rasped. Then the world went dark. Ender's Deep had never looked less inviting. Noble doubled over. The pain to her physical body did not transfer here, but her soul was still reeling. No, she pressed her hand on the wall, still feeling woozy. I didn't make it to the pod. Her plan had been to find Ford and let him know what had happened. And then, after she had told him what was going on, she could find a way to use the pod without suffocating herself. Even making back to her cabin would have been a step up from the crowded club car. She just didn't have the strength, so she passed out. Well, if I am feeling pain, then at least I am not dead. The reasoning was a little faulty, but it was all Noble had. Her body could die while her soul was here, just like her soul could be destroyed and her body left behind. The professor hoped that neither of these were the case. She would have to wait for her allotted time and then see if the gate would let her return. Until then, it was time to rest and recover. There's no use worrying about my body if I let my soul deteriorate, Noble spoke to herself to keep focused. If I am going to go to Antarctica, I will have to get better about being thrown sideways and not down. Or better yet, not being thrown at all. Who is being thrown? A friendly voice called from outside of the gaping maw. Venster, what are you doing here in the middle of the day? I am here on government business but was just about to head back. The young man furrowed his brow as he came closer to the other awakened. What is wrong with you? I met the wrong end of a fallen monster in the real world. I defeated it but fell unconscious shortly after. Noble explained. A fallen monster. In the NQSC. Venster was suddenly on alert. No, in the wilderness. I can tell you the short version if you'll help me to my room. I am a little out of sorts. My soul is in need of some healing. Noble smiled awkwardly. What? Oh, of course, I can fetch a healer as well. Venster looped one of the professor's arms over his shoulder. She adjusted it around his back and then relaxed so her body could float more freely. If the man found it odd, he said nothing. After she was back in her room and an awakened healer found, Noble was restored to almost full health in the matter of an hour. That left her quite a few more to rest and think about what was happening in the real world. Fortunately, Noble found something to distract her. Did the spell say I earned a memory? It was strange that the thought about the memory was only coming to her now. Professor Noble was an expert on memories at the academy, yet the battle and its aftermath had left her confused and fatigued. It was still astonishing that she had gotten credit for the kill. Only now, in the comfort of her room with her body securely tethered about her bed, did Noble grasp that her foolish endeavor had earned her a boon. Relaxing into a float between the floor and ceiling, she dove into her soul sea. Except for in the dreamscape, it had been a very long time since Noble had earned a memory. Since she didn't venture into the wilds of the dream realm, the opportunities to encounter and slay nightmare creatures were few and far between. Mostly she bought memories or forgot them for her. She felt a small exhilaration in the thrill of the unknown. Her soul sea was awash with the same iridescence as her mesmerizing eyes. The entire world was suffused with radiant light. A new ball revolved overhead. Noble spotted it instinctively and called it to herself. The advice she always gave her students was to examine a new memory in one's soul sea if possible. This was both for safety and practicality. Even though there was no one in the room with her, Noble kept the memory inside her while she discovered its purpose. Looking at the runes, her eyes widened slightly. Name: Rolling Thunder. Rank: Ascended. Type: Weapon. Description: The wind blew. The rain poured. The lightning flashed, yet nothing could compare to the thunder's deafening roar. Deafening roar, alright, let's take a look at you. Within the soul sea, Noble held out her hand for the memory to manifest. The sparks flickered and faded, leaving behind a weapon in her palm. Interesting. The professor had expected it to be shaped like a lightning bolt or other stormy object. From the description, this made the most sense. But the object in her hand was akin to a machinist's hammer. It had two heads, one flat and one rounded. They joined and attached to a polished wooden handle. Maybe this can be used to fashion lightning, the professor mused. She recalled the ancient myth of Hephaestus's forge. Tools like these had been used to make Zeus's thunderbolts. There was only one way to find out what the memory could do. Noble gripped the hammer. It's too bad I don't have B2 in my chamber. I'll just have to be careful. With no good way to test the rolling thunder's capability in her soul sea, Noble brought her consciousness back into her stone quarters. She had just enough replenished essence to call forth both the hammer and a candle memory to illuminate her small room. The professor pursed her lips. I really should rest. However, Noble was pretty sure that she would not fall asleep even if she tried, and there was no way the awakened would miss the chance to leave at the earliest opportunity. Sleeping, especially oversleeping, was not an option. This is relaxing and something I enjoy. It should be fine. Lowering herself closer to the ground, Noble placed the loosened taper to burn in a small alcove carved into the wall. The hammer looked the same out here as it did in her soul sea. It was very small compared to some hammers she had seen others wield in the Dreamscape. It felt nearly weightless in her hand. And you are a weapon. The professor focused, listening to her intuition. After examining every centimeter of the memory, she nodded. I need to strike something with it. But what? Noble picked up a pebble off of the ground and held it out in front of her. With the rolling thunder, she tapped the stone as lightly as she could. Despite her best efforts, the sound wave from the small hit was overwhelming. The air around her reverberated 100 times over with a thunderous boom. Her hand, which had been holding the stone, felt the shock of the strike. The bones of her hand nearly broke from the shaking. The stone, it was no more. Blast it, that stings. Noble wasn't sure whether to nurse her arm or cover her ears. Hadn't the healer just visited her? She didn't want to have to explain a second set of injuries, especially such embarrassing ones. Mercifully, the percussive wave was brief, and her arm did not shatter. The stone walls remained unharmed, though a small amount of debris shook free from the ceiling. Everything returned to normal. Well, almost everything. The lucent taper fell from its perch and was burning a hole in her small wooden table. Oops. Noble dismissed the light quickly, plunging the room into darkness. The professor could smell the smoke, but at least the fire was out. Is everything all right in there? Someone knocked on the door lightly. I was hoping none of the neighbors would have heard that. Noble knew it was a foolish hope. The sound was far too loud to remain in her small room. Just a little mishap. I don't know my own strength. It won't happen again. The professor called through the door. After waiting in the darkness for a long time to make sure her neighbor left, she sighed. If I want to look into this further, I need a different place to experiment. With her luck, a second tap from her little weapon would bring the roof down, and then she would have to explain why all of Ender's Deep was damaged because of her memory. Since she didn't want to wait, Noble took herself out of the city to the cliffs above. Many of the ruins of the original kingdom lay barren on the wide plain. A lot of the usable material had been salvaged from here, but even after countless years, things of worth were still occasionally discovered for those who wanted to look. One such thing caught her eye just now. A piece of colored glass was encapsulated by a metal frame. It looked too big to be a piece of women's jewelry. Maybe a sun catcher. The yellow and pink hues spun around one another in a teardrop shape. That will be very pretty in my room. Noble picked up the bauble and placed it near the edge of the cliff for her to pick up on her way back. It would be a shame to break it while trying out her new toy. Returning to her original mission, Noble found a spot on the surface that she thought was a safe distance from both the cliff and from the city below. It was time to get to work. Summoning the rolling thunder, the professor immediately began her experiments. Her first attempt yielded surprising results. Noble hit a section of the city's outer wall with a decent amount of force. The alabaster wall vibrated and large cracks formed through it, but the sound and force seemed less than when she had tapped the pebble before. That did not make sense. More trials were needed. The second hit brought better results and also taught her that she could direct the sound away from herself. That was incredibly helpful. If she and her allies were going to be affected by the boom as much as her enemy, then the weapon would only be good at long range. The third and fourth hits were more devastating than their predecessors, coming much closer to the force of the tap that Noble had experienced in her room. In time, she realized that the key to this mystery was just that, time. The longer she waited between uses, the more powerful the memory became. And apparently, the time in her soul sea counted while she was examining it, or else the first hit would not have caused her so much trouble. You're a tricky little thing, she muttered with a smirk. After playing around with her new toy for a few hours, and pulverizing a few sections of the city's walls in the process, Noble felt she had a decent grasp on how to wield it more effectively. She found there was also a point at which the hammer could not grow any more powerful. But that limit was higher than the professor had anticipated. For an ascended memory, it packs a decent punch. I wonder if it has another enchantment I have not yet discovered. I can't wait to get home and see what tier it is with B2. Before Noble could get home, she would have to get back to the waking world. She looked at the setting sun. It was almost time to leave. If she even could. As far as Noble knew, she had never met anyone who was stranded in the dream realm, those whose bodies were gone from the waking world, but whose spirits lived on here. Were they aware at the moment their bodies had perished? Or did they come to the gate only to find they could not return? Hopefully, I won't get that answer in a few moments from personal experience. Noble steeled her nerves against whatever would come. Her body was badly battered by her flaw, but her soul had taken the brunt of the hit. Surely she was overreacting. Right, she had a fleeting thought of seeing if awakened Emmer was around to let her know about the future, but his avoidance of her had been absolute for over a year and a half now. Even if she found him, Noble doubted the man would tell her what she wanted to know. So the professor entered the cavern of the gate with trepidation. Here goes nothing. 3, 2, 1. Noble laid her hand on the gate. Nothing happened. Don't panic. Don't panic. The woman's eyes swirled. Removing her hand, Noble took a deep breath. Then she pressed her palm against the cool gateway again while she hovered imperceptibly above the stone floor. Yet, in the dream realm, she remained. Frozen in her spot, Noble's mind raced. I'm dead. No, that wasn't true. Her body had died, but she was still here. It isn't the end of the world. Just a setback. Noble steadied her breathing. Now was not the time to panic. Take things one step at a time. First things first. How will I get a message to Fort that I am all right? He must be devastated. I'll have to find a way to contact him as soon as possible, I know. The beginning of a plan formed in her mind. When Venster came back, she would be sure to give him all the information for her husband. The government agent might have wanted to play messenger before, but now he would be one for real. It would be a strained life to only be able to communicate via long distance. Like pen pals of days gone by. But what choice did she have? The options for her going forward would be very limited. Would she have to conquer the second nightmare simply to be reunited with her family? That might leave me worse off than I am. Noble gasped. The cave disappeared, replaced by an unfamiliar sleeping pod. A large pillow was placed against her chest to keep her body and face from pressing against the roof. Disoriented, she instinctively pushed both the lid and pillow away from herself. Noble tumbled out of the pod. Where am I? You're awake, a voice said huskily. I'm alive. Noble looked at her husband wide-eyed. Fort, who had been sitting on his bed, rose and hobbled toward his wife. He gathered the woman up into his arms and held her tight. Is that proof enough that you are alive? He asked. Yes, she answered, melting into his embrace. Shush, it's all right. I have been monitoring you. I wasn't sure if the pillow would be enough. I've been checking on you almost constantly to make sure you are breathing. Tears flowed down Noble's face. She was really back. In the moment of believing herself lost, the professor had remained strangely calm. But now the terror of what could have been gripped her. You thought you were dead? Fort creased his brow. I thought my body was. I was in so much pain when I passed out. And then I couldn't come back when I went to the gate. Noble shook her head. I guess I was just too early. That made the most sense. The professor could usually gauge down to the second when she needed to leave. However, with it being daytime instead of night while she was there and her soul being injured when she arrived, her internal clock must have been thrown off ever so slightly. Time flies when you are having fun but stands still when you are waiting. Those few seconds of doubt had been terrifying, but at least they were over now. I was counting the seconds too. You looked so fragile when you left me. I am glad to see that you are fine. I spoke with the engineer. He said you fought the thing that was attacking us. What happened out there? Because Fort had been in his cabin when everything had occurred, the deputy director had missed the battle between Noble and the volitant bludgeoner. Noble was glad. It was one less trauma he would have to bear on her account. After forcing Fort to sit down and keep his foot elevated, she hovered over one of the armchairs. The professor looked up, remembering the scene. The creature was intent on overturning the dining car while I was in it. I kept having to stop it from tipping by using my ability. But the strain was too much for the train, so the coupling broke. We were on two different sides of the divide. I see. Fort's words were calm, but his body was full of anxiety. Noble looked down guiltily. I know I said that I would tell you before I dove into a dangerous situation, but the danger was between you and me. I tried to attack the bludgeoner, but he threw me into the ground. Hard. I focused all my emotional pain and fear onto the monster and amplified it. I guess it worked. I got credit for the kill and a memory. But I almost lost myself. OB, Fort sighed. I am glad you are alright. That must have been torture for you. In more ways than one. Noble put on a brave face. I only hope I didn't worry you too much. You did. The man grinned. But I forgive you. It was nice to hear the teasing in his voice. His smile was better for her soul than any medicine. You said you spoke with the engineer. For the first time, Noble became conscious of the fact that the train was moving again. Fort nodded slowly. He came by while the train was being repaired. I believe he wanted to have a rather stern conversation with you about how passengers are supposed to stay inside the train while it is moving, but I assured him you had learned your lesson. Trust me, I have. Noble had no intention of having history repeat itself. She planned to stay firmly ensconced in the cabin until they arrived. How far behind schedule are we? Do you know? Noble was curious just how many meals she would be eating from the armchair. We were only stopped for a few hours. Whatever was broken, they must have had a spare part or an awakened who could repair it. We should still be there close to on time the day after tomorrow. That was a relief. The sooner she got off this nightmare creature magnet without any more trouble, the better. Good. What's that? Noble noticed a small package by the bed. Oh, I almost forgot. This was brought for you. The chef on board wanted to harvest some of the meat while we waited and sent you this as a thank you. Ford unwrapped the cloth and pulled out a crystal shining with a dull radiance. Noble smiled. It's been a long time since I've seen one of those. Noble took the soul shard in her hand and crushed it. As it dissolved, she took a deep breath. The professor had never fully saturated her core. By exiting the dream realm so quickly on her solstice visit and then remaining in the safety of Ender's Deep, Noble had few opportunities to earn shards. The influx of power was invigorating. How do you feel? Ford eyed his wife carefully. Stronger, she smiled. Thank you for holding onto it while I was sleeping. That helped. I need to get you more. Ford made a mental note. The doting husband had bought many of them for her when they were first married, but shards weren't exactly the most rewarding gifts for him to present. Eventually, he found that procuring memories was more fulfilling. At least those could be stored in the woman's soul sea without needing to be destroyed. You don't need to fuss over me. I am fine. Noble looked down at herself. She still had on her armor from the fight. It didn't look fine, and likely neither did she. The deputy director frowned. It isn't fussing. Realistically, we need to get working on that as soon as possible. If you insist on going, Antarctica will have far more than a single beast to slay. You must be at your best. Noble nodded. Of course, Ford was right. Anything less than top shape could be a detriment to herself and those she wanted to help. Saturating her core was now a top priority. But that wasn't something she could do just now. I suppose I should change and get cleaned up. Noble rose after a pause. Ford rubbed the back of his neck. I would have helped you with that, but I cannot exactly dismiss your armor for you. It only took a moment for the professor to dig out something new to wear. She selected some pants and a comfortable top that would fit better under her armor in case she needed to summon it again. Hopefully, she wouldn't. So many things to consider these days. Noble rubbed her forehead. Her life was always spent juggling a dozen things at any moment in time. She should be used to it by now. A small sound from the bed caught Noble's attention. Are you all right? Ford nodded. Just my stomach growling, nothing important. Noble's eyes widened. When was the last time you ate? Before the incident, she had been on her way to get him lunch. That was many hours ago. I'll get you something right away. Noble took a step toward the door and then hesitated. While she didn't want to make Ford walk on his injured foot, she also did not want to leave him behind. Before she could make a decision, the deputy director reached out and caught her arm. How about I call the porter, and he can bring us something? Noble relaxed. That sounds lovely. The porter came and offered them a small menu of selections. May I recommend the special for the day? We have orange monster meat on the grill as we speak. The professor stared at him in disbelief. Quote. Did you say orange meat? .. The porter was serious, but Noble declined, opting for a more traditional meal. Ford was disappointed, but he also understood. The rest of the trip passed peacefully, much to the couple's relief. The professor reluctantly took one more trek into the dream realm before they arrived at their destination. She came back just in time to see the fortified port peek over the horizon. Due to the inherent danger of the sea, almost no one lived by the salty water. But that did not stop major merchants from maintaining water trade routes. It was necessary for the survival of humanity as well as their profits that goods travel between the continents as efficiently as possible. And that meant braving the water. The only others who were willing to be so close to the depths were members of the House of Knight and the military. The former always had a respect and affinity for the waves, and the latter needed to maintain the navy. All three groups had a presence in the place where she was going. Like man-made mountains, thick walls jutted up to the sky from all sides including the water. Atop them were weapons larger and many times more powerful than what the train could reasonably support. It was a formidable fortress. Noble pulled her eyes away from the towering structure to an equally impressive sight. The ocean stretched out before them, glistening in the afternoon sun. Her heartbeat quickened. Fort grabbed her hand. "You traveled across that?" His voice was full of genuine wonder. The deputy director often projected the image of a peaceful beach on his office wall, but it was completely different to see it in person. "If you mean an ocean, yes. If you mean the ocean toward Antarctica, no." Noble didn't want to lecture him on geography, but North America and Antarctica weren't exactly in the same part of the world. She waited for the witty retort, but he looked seriously into her eyes. "You become more amazing every day." "What?" Noble blushed. Ford nodded slowly. "You came across an expanse having lost so much, started over and made a new life." "I don't know if I could have done it." Noble pursed her lips. It wasn't like she had had a choice in the matter at the time. But the professor realized that nothing she could say just then would change her husband's high opinion of her. Not that she wanted to. "Thank you. I think you are pretty impressive yourself." All at once, the train was enveloped by massive walls, giving the couple the first clear view of the port. Around 36 colossal ships sat sleepily in the harbor, looking more like metal islands than methods of transport. They were much larger than the one Noble had arrived on years before. "Look at that spelltech." Fort stared in wonder at the fortress itself. "It's nice," Noble said noncommittally. By his heightened emotion, she could tell the man was very excited, but she wasn't exactly sure why. Her expertise was in memories, not combining magic with modern technology. "I hope they will let me get a closer look at some of it. What we have at headquarters is mostly defensive. This is a whole other level." Fort pressed his hand to the glass. "You sound like a child in a candy store." The professor chuckled softly. "I cannot help it. You know I am a nerd at heart. If I hadn't found my place in the government, I think spelltech would have been a good profession. If you are really that interested, you could make it a hobby." Noble raised one eyebrow at him, but he shook his head. Fort clicked his tongue. "I don't have time for a hobby. Unlike you, I have to sleep." The train slowed to a stop, and the doors to the cars hissed open. Looking out the window at the platform, Fort spotted a familiar face. "There's our welcome party." He stood and winced. "Shall I carry you again?" Noble asked when she saw her husband's pain. "Ha, very funny." He barked a laugh as he tried to adjust his foot in his shoe. "Wait, you were kidding, weren't you? It's better than walking with a cane or a limp, isn't it?" The professor asked, floating along on the ground like I'm above everyone. "No, thank you." Fort saw his wife's eyes begin to swirl. "Wait, no, I didn't mean that the way it sounded. I simply meant that floating is your thing and not mine. Not that it is a thing. I know you don't have any choice, but..." Noble smiled humorlessly. "Don't let me stop you. You seem much more comfortable digging a hole in the earth than you do hovering over it." Fort rubbed the back of his neck. "Much more digging and I'll be 6 feet under." "Very well, carry me." In the end, the couple found a middle ground. Noble held his injured foot slightly off the ground so that it did not come in contact with the earth, supporting the rest of his legs so he had enough purchase to walk with the other foot. It was an odd-looking hobble, but far better than floating like a bubble onto the platform. And far, far better than angering his wife. Fort made his way through the crowded platform to a woman in a blue military trenchcoat. Her icy blue eyes tracked his progress with a bland smile. "Deputy Director Fort," she greeted him as he neared. Fort and the lady shook hands. "Ascended Jet, or should I call you Colonel?" Jet's mouth tipped up ever so slightly. "It makes no difference to me, but those here call me Colonel." "It's been a long time. I am surprised you remember me." The deputy director tilted his head curiously. "You never forget your first real government assignment." Jet's smile faded. "I suppose not. This is my wife, Awakened Noble." Fort motioned to the lovely lady standing beside him. "You married up, Deputy Director," Jet chuckled. In both brains and beauty, Fort agreed easily. Noble wondered if her husband could feel the ominous aura coming off of the other Awakened. Jet's emotions felt fractured somehow. Like they were there and not there. The professor pushed the thoughts aside. "It is nice to meet you, Colonel Jet. Did you say you met my husband on a government assignment?" "I did, though that was over a decade ago." The tired-looking officer glanced at Fort to see if he wanted to explain. Fort nodded. "There was an attack at one of the government buildings by one of our Awakened agents. My coworker was a bit of a ticking time bomb, literally. Soul Reaper came in and dealt with him in one strike. She wasn't even a master when she saved all of our lives. I am forever grateful. A lot of thanks I got from everyone else, Jet said wryly. Everyone but your husband was scared stiff. They scattered like frightened bunnies. But Fort placed his hand on my shoulder and told me I had done well. Called me a hero. That sounds like him, Noble agreed. Is that how you got the name Soul Reaper? Jet chuckled darkly. One of the ways. Noble wondered why she had not heard this story before. Perhaps she had, and Fort had just downplayed the significance. Or, based on the timing, it might have happened around the time Seb died, and Fort had not wanted to burden her further. At least she was getting to hear the story now. Thank you for saving my husband. Noble dipped her head in gratitude. Jet clapped her hands. Where are my manners? Welcome to the port. If you will follow me, we can get down to business. The platform had begun to clear, leaving the three an easy avenue to move along. I heard you had a bit of a bumpy ride. Jet didn't say how she got the information. Just a bit, Fort answered, not wanting to make his wife relive the harrowing ordeal. Did your leg get hurt in the process? The colonel was not blind. She had seen him amble awkwardly toward her when he exited the train. I broke my toe getting on the train. We were in too much of a hurry, and the healer on our way here was mundane. The deputy director explained quickly. Then I will take you by the infirmary before our meeting. That can be fixed up in no time. Muaz. Jet's gaze fell on a soldier as they exited the platform. At your service. The man saluted, awaiting orders. Jet indicated the suitcases. Take the bags to their quarters. Reluctantly, Noble released her and her husband's things to the waiting hands. She had hoped to freshen up a little, but it seemed like it was not meant to be. Accepting the bags, Muaz shrunk them to fit in his palm and smiled. He walked away casually with his miniaturized cargo. Don't worry, he will return them to normal. Jet saw the other woman's expression. He can only do it to himself and inanimate objects. They stepped off of the station platform and into the port. A PTV and driver were waiting for them. Change of plans. We're heading to the infirmary first, Jet told the driver as she leapt into the passenger seat. She motioned for the couple to climb in the back. The military cruiser was quite different from city vehicles. Instead of being sleek and stylish, this one was utilitarian, angular, and armored. About the only thing the two types of vehicles had in common was that they both rode on four wheels. But then Noble found out that this, too, was a difference. After taking his seat, the deputy director leaned forward toward the driver. I hate to be a bother, but with my foot hurting, could you activate hover mode? Any little bump will agitate it. Noble shot her husband a questioning glance. Hover mode, understood. The blue-eyed driver pressed a button. Suddenly, the seat below Noble buoyed up and pressed against her rear. But, it didn't hurt. This can float. Her eyes went wide. Neat, isn't it? Fort grinned. Make yourself comfortable. Noble relaxed into the seat. It wasn't luxurious, but after days on the train, it felt heavenly. Thank you, she mouthed to her husband. While Fort would benefit, Noble knew the request was for her comfort more than his. He winked. You mentioned a meeting, the deputy director asked Soul Reaper. Jet nodded. The big brass is having a meeting as we speak, and I was asked to bring you by so they could loop you in. Since you are here anyway, the chancellor and directors have a few requests. Above my pay grade, most likely. I'll get you there as soon as the healer gives you a clean bill of health. What about me? The professor guessed that the big brass had not invited her. Jet straightened her collar. A tour has been arranged to give you a feel for the area. Your driver should be able to help you with any tasks or we'll find someone who can. Isn't that right? The brown-haired man saluted. Whatever you say, Colonel. The PTV revved and took off. Fortunately, the infirmary was not busy, and an awakened healer was able to fix Fort's broken bone in less than a minute. With everything settled, it was time for the group to part ways. I'll see you as soon as I can, the deputy director assured Noble. Go, take care of business. I have a job to do too, you know. I love you. Love you too. Fort shut the door of the PTV with Noble inside. He walked off beside Colonel Jet, his gait back to its normal manly stride. That healer did good work. Awakened Noble. The driver startled her from her longing gaze. Where would you like to go first? The professor had studied the area while traveling. There was so much she wanted to see and assess. But she had no particular starting point. I want to see it all, she answered at last. What do you recommend? The driver thought for a moment and smiled. I know just the place to start. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Because the medical facility was situated next to another government building, Jet and Fort had decided to walk to their meeting. That left the driver as Noble's only companion for the afternoon. I don't believe I caught your name. Apologies. I'm Collapsar, but I go by Cole. The driver pulled away from the infirmary. Cole, Noble repeated. Care to tell me where we are going first? I figured we would start at the water and then work our way inland, Cole commented over his shoulder while his blue eyes remained stalwartly forward. Noble's stomach clenched. Part of her wanted to object and say there was no need for her to get any closer to the water than they already were. Her last experience with a port had been nothing short of horrific. But if she wanted to go to Antarctica, the ocean would be a fear she would need to face. So the professor steeled her nerves. The closer they got to the water, the bigger the metal behemoths floating in the water became. Noble felt the rumble of the engine beneath the seats as they grew ever nearer. It was a strange feeling. Were rides always this uneven and she was unaware? Cole answered her question without being asked. Sorry for the bumpy ride. This is only my second time driving in hover mode. Noble tilted her head. Oh, when was the first? On our way to the infirmary. Cole shrugged. Oh, well, you are doing a wonderful job. Do you need to return it to normal? Noble liked the comfort of sitting, but she also didn't want to be responsible for a vehicle accident right after she arrived. No, it should be fine. I need the practice. Cole turned the wheel to avoid a pedestrian. If Cole wasn't chosen for his driving, he must have other skills. Noble quickly found out what one of those skills was. The man knew anything and everything about the fortified port. We have 40 vessels in the harbor ready to head out in the next week or two. Each is equipped to house thousands of people and tons of equipment and supplies. This is one of 4 convoys set to head to Antarctica. 2 such convoys are leaving from our quadrant. Noble thought about the scale of the operation. The whole world was coming together for this catastrophe. And the ships will return with refugees. Cole nodded. That is the plan. It is the most efficient use of resources. If 2 convoys were leaving from the northern quadrant and returning with civilians, then that meant half of the survivors would land on these shores. And most of those would likely end up in the NQSC. If all goes well, that is a lot of people. Almost an impossible amount to house. So many people would put a strain on the already stretched resources of the NQSC in the world. But the alternative was countless lives lost in the wake of Nightmare Gates. There was no winning. We will just have to do our best. There is no other option. Pulling out her communicator, Noble began to make notes. This evening she would process all she had learned and transfer it over to the government datapad for her mother to see. Cole continued to talk as she worked. He spoke of the dimensions of the ships and many other factors of the port. Most of it was not relevant to her mission, but the end caught her attention. Saint Bloodwave and his nephew, Master Knave, will be personally escorting these vessels southward. The House of Night really is putting in all their effort. Noble was glad at least one of the major clans was committed to the cause. The day before, Fort had confirmed with his superior that Valor was true to their promise. For their part, Song was sending a small contingent as well. Both groups would be enough to make the clans look good but not enough to burden the houses of power. And the government couldn't do much about it. At least not without alerting the public to the dire nature of what was coming. Noble had gotten so lost in her thoughts that she nearly missed as they turned away from the docks and back toward the train station. Would you like to check out the trading town or the military outpost next? Cole asked politely. I suppose the town. I would like to end as close to where we left Fort as possible. Noble hoped her husband would message her when his meeting was complete. Taking the cue, Cole aimed for the trading village that shared the protection of the towering walls. Housing thousands of people, it was dotted with identical dwellings along well-planned streets near the warehouses for storing goods. Cole told her that all of the people who lived here permanently were either employees keeping the port running or their families. While not a luxurious life, it was far better than living in the outskirts. With the military so close, things were usually kept neat and orderly. Noble watched massive loaders pull cargo and place it on the train. The engine had already been turned around and would begin its journey back to the NQSC with supplies within the hour. The workers are the height of efficiency here. Cole nodded. The mundane employees operating the loaders looked like sorcerers lifting things 50 or more times their small size. A handsome man with a hard hat was directing the work. His firm build and commanding voice spoke of authority. "You over there, look alive. Get those things packed on the double before I hit you over the head with a sign." "What are you doing?" "Yield. Yield." The foreman hurried toward where two loaders were close to colliding. As they drew nearer, Noble could hear him speaking to the two workers who had almost caused the catastrophe. "What kind of prank was that? If you are going to gamble, save it for your off time." "You know I do. Is everything all right?" the professor called out to the foreman from the PTV. Dismissing the workers to finish their tasks, the man walked over to address the question. "I mean, no one died, so it's a good day," he smiled. "Do people die normally?" The professor looked up at the loaders warily. "It's a little foreman humor. Don't mind me." The man took off his helmet and ran his fingers through his hair. "Unless the military is giving out rides for fun, this isn't a social visit. Is there something I can help you with?" "I'm awakened, Noble. I am reporting on the state of things here. You seem a bit busy though. I can come back another time." The foreman barked a laugh. "Ha, there is never a dull moment around here. We work from dawn to dusk and a little extra to keep things moving." Noble nodded. "I see. The name's Krasta," the foreman offered. "I don't know that anyone can see what goes on just from a brief look. Your eyes must be quite good." "I didn't mean to imply." The professor stopped as she saw Krasta's face split into a smile. "You almost had me. Maybe next time," Krasta chuckled. "Feel free to look around. I only ask that you don't touch anything." "Understood. It wouldn't be an issue." Noble had no intention of leaving the vehicle on the tour unless instructed to do so. "Thank you. Happy to help." The foreman dipped his head and turned to leave. "Krasta," an idea entered the woman's head. "Do you need any help? I mean, do you have enough workers here for what you need?" The foreman's eyes went wide. "Are you kidding? We have been asking for at least 100 or more people to support our increase in labor. But no one seems to want to come. I don't know what the problem is. It's not like our company is that lethal. We get decent wages for our work." "Thank you for the information. I will add that to my report and see if I can get you the necessary workers soon." "Will 100 be enough?" Noble typed into her communicator. "If you send 200, I think we will finally no longer be breaking our backs all day." Krasta stretched to relieve the tension. "Noted. Can I find you here if I have any more questions?" Krasta placed his hat back on his head. "Of course. Someone has to keep things on track." With that, the PTV moved on while Noble put as much information as she could on her communicator. 200 jobs for the refugees found, only millions more to go. There were a few more places where the tradesmen of the port could use extra hands, but it was not nearly enough for the influx of people that would be coming to the shores. Anything is better than nothing, Noble reminded herself. Each singular job might not make a big difference in the mass of humanity, but it made a difference to the one who had a way to support their family. I have to keep things in perspective. The only way to eat the elephant is one bite at a time. Each victory, however small, is still a victory. Noble sighed. And we have a loot of victories to make. Lena was right in believing that she needed eyes on the port. The longer the tour went, the more things Noble found where she needed additional information. One point of interest was the temporary buildings covering the area. The closer they got to the military barracks, the more of them there were. Some were being constructed while others were being torn down. The whole place looked like a hill of ants which had been stirred by a child. Cole was forced to slow their progress. "Why are they disassembling the buildings?" the professor asked him while they waited for a wall to pass in front of them. "The temporary buildings will be shipped along with the soldiers. At least at first, they will need all the extra space." Cole turned around to view the professor's troubled face. "What, are they not leaving any behind? What about the refugees who come on the return trip?" The professor pictured the area where they were waiting. Devoid of buildings, the space would be a wasted opportunity to house people until they could be transported to a more permanent home. "That's above my pay grade, ma'am. I can tell you what is, but I am not sure what will be." "Shall I find someone who can answer that for you?" Cole's blue eyes beckoned her answer. Of course, Noble knew there was probably no answer to her question just yet. Her mother was looking at all of the logistics along with a large team of people. It's unlikely that all 40 ships will return together. They are not all heading to the same place. I'll have to see how many the barracks can hold. Perhaps they will be enough for a ship or two of families to rest before moving on. I do not need that answer at present. I will let you know in the future. Noble liked her tour guide. She had been very nervous in the beginning, especially with his driving skills, but they had gotten along very well. At last, the wall cleared from their path, and they could continue onward. The next area, though not as relevant to her mission, was particularly fascinating to the professor. "What are those?" She pointed to their left. Cole looked at the closing door to a massive hangar. A vehicle was peeking out at them with a wedge at the front. "Those are called rhinos. You don't want to be at the wrong end of those. They will run you and any nightmare creature over without a second thought." "That's fascinating, but I think we are not looking at the same thing. I meant those tall things over there." Noble stared at the hulking machines. They dwarfed the loaders that had been loading the train and looked like monsters in their own right. If not for their robotic look and the way the soldiers ignored the giants, Noble would have been tempted to call on her armor to defend herself. "The MWPs, they look even more impressive in battle, or so I am told. I guess we will all get to find out soon enough." Cole slowed down again to wait for another convoy to pass in front. This one seemed to be loading foodstuffs. The break in movement allowed Noble to get a close-up look at the colossal machine. The combination of spelltech and heavy machinery was nothing short of astonishing. "Our spelltech specialist, Rurushu, keeps all of our weapons and gear in top form." Cole beamed with pride. "An MWP, so that is what Catfine operates. How does she even get in there?" The professor marveled. Although most of the soldiers around were mundane, some of them were awakened. Would Cat be among those sent overseas to fight the gates? The professor sent off a quick message to her former student to see if she might be in the area. The answer came almost immediately. "Still in the NQSC for a few more days, and then I will be on a new assignment." Noble did not have to guess what that was. Catfine would be heading out on one of these ships. Hamish would likely be going, as would so many others. People like that young man she met on the light rail that day. Ash. Noble recalled his name absent-mindedly. "Ma'am." Cole furrowed his brow. "Oh, do you know a soldier named Ash?" The professor wasn't sure what answer she hoped for. Cole thought for a moment before shaking his head. "I do not, but I can ask someone to look through the records." "Is he a relative of yours, ma'am?" "No, and there is no need to look. It was just a passing thought. If Noble had found him, what would she even say? Even if he had joined the army, the young man was unlikely to remember her." Cole suddenly threw the PTV into reverse. "Hold on." One of the MWPs came marching across the ground, shaking it with each mighty step. People were forced to flee from its path. Everyone hurried to escape death by friendly fire. Well, almost everyone. One awakened, who refused to move, was stepped on by the behemoth yet managed not to get squashed. She saw the man's skin return from a steely state as soon as the pressure of the gargantuan foot was removed. The driver of the MWP parked the machine alongside the rest and then slid out without a second thought. His face was devoid of emotion and nothing in his body spoke of the tense moments he had created by his approach. If Noble was forced to describe him, a single word came to her mind. The MWP operator looked bored. The tattoo of an oleander on his neck and single silver earring only added to his nonchalance. Noble's PTV driver did not share the sentiment. "Yokai, watch where you are going, man," Cole shouted at the soldier. Yokai saluted the vehicle. "Nice to see you too, Cole. Your driving is really improving." "You mean you did that just to see if I would be able to get out of the way?" Cole's mouth hung open. The other driver shrugged. "What can I say? It keeps life interesting." Noble wondered at the exchange. Was this how people behaved in the army? Between Master Jet and this strange interaction, the professor got the impression that the military was far more laid back than she had previously believed. Or perhaps it was just because they were all gearing up for war that they all needed to let loose a little beforehand. One thing was for sure. If Yokai is looking for something to keep life interesting, then he is heading to the right place. Antarctica is about to be about the most interesting place on Earth. "Will there be anything else, awakened Noble?" Cole asked as they stood outside a door. He had walked the professor from the PTV to make sure she had found her way. "You have been more than helpful. And I have your information if I have any more questions. Thank you for everything." The lady dipped her head in gratitude. Her guide backed up and saluted. "Someone will be in touch with you to continue your investigation in the morning. Have a wonderful evening." The tour had taken the rest of the afternoon, but the professor was finally able to get to her quarters and rest a moment before dinner. As promised, her bags were returned to their normal size. Unlike the bulk of the barracks, her room was one of the few above ground. It was clearly for visiting guests and dignitaries. It still had a Spartan feel, but was not nearly as cramped as the rooms she had gotten a chance to view before Cole dropped her at this door. Underground is safer, but above ground at least doesn't feel so claustrophobic. Noble glanced out the window. Mundane soldiers were running through the paces of silent drills. Their sergeant was pushing them to the limit. They would need all the training they could get for what was to come. Noble pulled the curtain shut. Time to get cleaned up. A quick washing of the travel grime off of her face and a change of clothes left her feeling refreshed for the evening meal. About the time she was planning to strike out on her own, there was a knock at the door. Thankfully, it was someone coming to escort her to the mess hall. Outside the dining room, Ford was waiting looking as handsome as ever. "I was beginning to think you would never get out of your meeting," Noble teased as she kissed her husband on the cheek. "I'm so sorry," Ford sighed apologetically. One meeting ran into another and another. It's like as soon as everyone found out that someone from headquarters was here, they all needed to have some face time. "I'm not even that important in the scheme of things, but that didn't seem to matter. You are important to me. Is it my turn for a meeting?" Noble batted her eyelashes. "No," Ford answered sternly. His face softened. "But I wouldn't mind a dinner date. 2 dates in a week. You will spoil me." The professor giggled. Ford rubbed the back of his neck. "Well, I doubt the food will be as good and the dress is certainly not as formal." It was hard to believe that the Valor Ball had been a week before. So much seemed to have happened since then. But the company will be just as enchanting. As long as no one ends up trying to murder us at the end, you will have no complaints from me. Noble nodded. "I love how easy you are to please," Ford chuckled. "Shall we?" He gallantly offered his arm and the couple entered the military's mess hall. The scene before them was orderly chaos. Noble was very glad Ford's foot was healed, because it was unlikely that he would have been able to maneuver through the rows of tables without getting bumped. "Let's sit over here." Ford guided them over to an empty space at the end of one of the tables. Maybe I should have taken Ascended Jet up on her offer to dine with the officers. Ford had not wanted to impose and had also wanted a bit of a break from talking business. It seemed he had traded business for noise. "Don't worry about it, this will be nice," Noble assured him. She had 3 kids. A little racket never bothered her. Ford smiled at her. "I'll get us something to eat. Any preference?" Looking around, Noble pulled her mouth to one side. "It seems like there may only be one choice. But at least it looks good." Ford winked and ambled off through the crowd. The professor was left to study those around her. Since most of the people going to Antarctica were mundane soldiers, the dining hall only had a few awakened. But the ones she did see gave her some small hope. The huge MWPs and rhinos she had witnessed would also make a dent in the enemy, but would it be enough? "What can I contribute in this war?" Noble considered this question honestly. She was a fierce fighter. But her flaw, it was crippling. The battle with the bludgeoner had proven that. "I just want to make a difference." The professor shook off her melancholic mood as her husband approached with 2 plates of steaming food. "Dinner is served," he said cheerily. "Oh, and there is someone I want you to meet. Over here." Setting down the plates, Ford waved at someone across the room. A winsome man around 30 years old began moving toward them with a tray of food. His eyes were a beautiful indigo, the same color Noble's turned when she was supremely happy. The man's dark black hair had imperceptible blue highlights under the cafeteria's industrial lights. Garnering a large amount of attention from those around him, the Ascended's commanding presence encouraged others to make way for him without being asked. The crowd parted like 2 waves of the sea, allowing the master to cross through the room unhindered. When he reached the couple, the man flashed a brilliant smile. "Deputy Director Fort, I wasn't sure if I would be able to find you in here." "Master Knave, thank you for coming. I did not think about how crowded it would be." The 2 men shook hands and then Fort motioned to the woman beside him. "This is my wife, Awakened Noble. Pleased to meet you, Ascended Knave." The professor dipped her head. "Just call me Knave, and the pleasure is all mine. Fort has told me all about you." The master clapped the other man on the shoulder. "Oh," Noble raised her eyebrows at her husband. "All good things, I promise," Fort assured her. He realized that more explanation was needed. "One of the meetings today was with the House of Night. We got to talking and found we had a lot in common. I invited him to have dinner with us." The deputy director winced slightly. He had promised his wife a date and then brought another person to the table. Knave glanced between the couple. "I make that look whenever I mess up with my wife as well. If I am intruding." Noble waved off his concern. "No, please sit down. If Ford enjoys your company, I am sure I will as well." I would be honored for you to join us. The master nodded and took a seat across the table. That is most generous of you. I shall strive to be worthy. Meanwhile, Noble's mind was racing. The professor had seen this man before. His eyes and hair were striking, and it only took her a moment to realize where she had encountered him. Of course. Oh no. The awakened paled. Knave met her eyes with curiosity. A spark of recognition ran across his face. Noble looked away, her cheeks flushing. Forgive me, the master furrowed his brow. I know this may sound a little crazy. But have we met before? Closing her eyes to steady herself, Noble took a long sip of water before answering. She somehow managed to keep a neutral expression. I don't think we have ever been properly introduced. Why do you ask? Knave coughed awkwardly. Oh, I suppose you just remind me of someone. Were you at the Dreamscape finals? That's where I have seen you. Fort broke in with a wide grin. You were there at the finals, weren't you? Knave chuckled. I helped Transcendent Thane give out prizes for the group finale, yes. Fort clapped his hands excitedly. I was in the audience. It took all of my government pull to get me there, but I can't get enough of Queen Bee and Fireshing. You are a big fan of that dynamic duo, are you? Knave raised one eyebrow. He then sent a questioning glance to the woman across from him. Fort even wanted bobbleheads of them at one point, Noble put in, hoping that would satisfy the master's curiosity. What do you mean wanted? I still want them if they ever get made. The deputy director took a bite of his food indignantly. The three of them laughed good-naturedly. Ah, you both are making me miss my wife, Knave sighed. We like to tease each other as well. Do you have any children? Noble was happy for the change in subject, but she was also curious to know the answer. To be a master at his age would mean quite a bit of sacrifice. The fact he was married meant he at least had someone to ground him in the waking world. The blue-haired man nodded. I have a 5-year-old daughter. I hear you have one as well. Yes, but she is not 5 anymore. She will be 16 in a few months. We also have twin boys who are 11. Noble watched the master's face light up. 3 kids, how wonderful. Are any of yours obsessed with Song of Light and Darkness like my little one? She can recite the lines by heart. That's adorable. The professor could picture the man listening to his daughter act out the scenes. Knave nodded. Her favorite character is Sunny. Ah yes, Master Sunless. It's not the most flattering portrayal of him, but it does make him lovable. At our house, my team cannot get enough of the romance. I do wonder if they will make a sequel. Noble remembered the dance she had seen at the ball the other night. Rumors of that would be more than enough for some enterprising young movie maker to try his hand at making a second story in the series. If they do, I hope they use Griffin for the musical score. Ford nodded seriously. I have a funny story about him, actually. Although Noble had heard the tale more times than she could count, the other listener was quite interested. He gave the appropriate amount of surprise when the tale was done. Knave hummed softly. I always like to hear the origin stories. I will never listen to Bored Beyond Belief the same way again. The three chatted on well into the next hour. The people around them changed twice, but the trio did not seem to notice. And then my daughter looks me straight in the eye and says deadpan, "Are you crazy?" I laughed until I cried. Knave wiped at his eyes as if the tears were still there. You'll have to forgive me for talking so much about my daughter. There aren't a lot of other parents around here. I understand, Ford nodded. Having children changes things, and we would do anything for them, the master added. Ah, I miss my little girl. It is hard not to be with her. I am sure she misses you too. Noble could see the man was a devoted father. How long will you be away? Knave pulled at his chin. Hard to say. We leave here in a couple of weeks and then it is about 3 weeks to Antarctica. Even if I am escorting the first group of evacuees back, that is at least another 3 weeks before I return here. So at least 8 to 9 weeks before people from Antarctica hit our shores. That seems like forever and no time at all. The master frowned. I doubt I will be coming back any time soon though. The House of Night is rather pivotal to this operation. I will not leave my uncle to shoulder that burden alone. It is important work, Noble agreed. So is yours, Knave countered. Mine. The professor was caught off guard. Knave motioned to the deputy director. Fort tells me that you are here to gather information to help with the logistics and rehousing of refugees when they arrive. I am, but it is truly admirable. The master seemed to believe his words. How can you compare desk work to fighting on the front lines? Noble found his logic confusing. Anyone can wield a sword. It takes physical strength to slay nightmare creatures. But helping people rebuild their lives when they have lost everything, that takes mental strength and courage. It is a daunting task indeed. I do not envy you. Knave lifted his cup. The professor considered his words. Of the two tasks, getting out of North America had been far quicker than trying to start over. They were different kinds of difficult. Thank you for your kind words, she said at last. It seemed unfair to accept the praise. It was her mother, Lena, who was a contributor to the project. Noble was just a stand-in. I will send on his good wishes to Mom when I get home, Noble promised herself. Fort swallowed a bite of food. Speaking of work, how did it go today? Better than I thought considering I mainly took a tour of the facility. The professor had managed to check a lot of things off of the list of tasks while looking around. Lena had wanted to get eyes on things at the port, and Noble had taken copious notes and a few pictures to provide as much information as she could. What is your goal for tomorrow, if I may ask? Knave set down his cup and leaned against the table. Same as the whole time I am here. Noble tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. We need to figure out how to move and relocate millions of people to new homes. I don't suppose you have space in the House of Night for that many new members. Wouldn't that be nice? I will ask my uncle his opinion, but I doubt many of the refugees are going to want to have such a close ties with the water after crossing it. Knave was right. Most people feared the ocean with good reason. I appreciate you humoring me. Noble understood his answer. The government would have to keep looking. Not even the outskirts could absorb that many newcomers. Knave stretched and rose from his seat. This has been wonderful, but I must get back. I hope to see you both around while you are here. Noble also stood to wish him well when someone bumped her. Her feet did not move, but the unexpected jostle shifted her a few centimeters to one side. The master studied her for a moment. You said you were a fan of Queen Bee. He looked at Fort. That is what I said, Fort answered unapologetically. A bit of mischief played around his eyes. Knave smiled warmly. Very interesting. Then again, who wouldn't like her? I must be on my way. Good to see you, awakened Noble. Good evening, Deputy Director Fort. As the master turned away, Noble flushed crimson. Surely he didn't guess from just that. I am losing my touch. Not that this was anything new. Her lack of ability to touch was always the problem anyway. Noble gathered the rest of the information over the following 3 days. Every time she thought she had gotten a handle on things, a new factor figure would come to light. During those days, troops poured into the port from various places. If things were crowded before, now they were positively cramped. So Noble was quite relieved when a train was able to take them back to the NQSC. Do you have everything you need? Fort asked as he picked up their bags to carry them to the station. I will probably never have all I need, but I know who to ask and how to get that information when we get back home. I only hope my mother is ready for all that I have to tell her. The professor had been sending reports every evening to Lena, but there was something about a face-to-face meeting that would be far better for communication. Sorry I was not more help. I know I should have seen it coming, but I had not planned on being the point of contact for the NQSC while I was here. The deputy director had squeezed more meetings into his short time there than anyone should have in a year. Other than his dinner the first night, Fort had not found any time to relax. Both of them had been exceptionally busy. It is just as well. I am not sure what I would have done with you following me around like a puppy. In theory, the professor might have liked a handsome man following her around listening to her every command, but in practice, it would not have worked. In life, Fort and Noble were a team, but that did not mean they needed to spend every waking hour doing the exact same thing. Especially when that task was stressful. It made their time together in the evening that much more precious. Now, it was time to head home. Fortunately, Noble had gotten over her fear of the train. Their trip here had not quite been a worst-case scenario, but it was pretty close, and they had survived. The pull of home called to her louder than any nightmare gate. After double-checking that everything was packed, the pair headed out of their quarters. The amount of activity had more than doubled since their first day, making it difficult for them to push their way toward the train station. That is why when there was suddenly a wide hole, the couple took notice. A young man with dark hair and pale skin was moving through the compound. Rather than upset the master, the mundane soldiers chose to crowd together and let him through. Recognizing the soldier, Noble couldn't help but stare. The young man looked her way a moment later. Their eyes locked. A small smile graced his face as he changed directions to head toward the couple. Master Sunless, Fort greeted the young man as he approached. You are a long way from home. As are you. Sunless clasped the older man's hand. He dipped his head toward the professor. Awakened Noble. I realize we didn't speak at the ball. I figured you didn't recognize me. I imagine I look a little different when I'm at the academy or out gardening next door. Anyway, you were a little busy. Noble remembered his dance with Lady Changing Star that ended poorly. Now the master was here a week later while the news reported that the beautiful lady was being adopted by Clan Valor. Probably just a coincidence. Heading to Antarctica, the deputy director asked, eyeing the captain's insignia with some curiosity. I am heading up a company of irregulars, Sunless answered with a shrug. He hesitated. Or either of you? Not just now, Noble answered quickly. Currently, we are just here on government business. We head back to the NQSC in less than an hour. I see. Master Sunless nodded slowly. The young man seemed relieved, much to Noble's confusion. Shouldn't he want more help, not less? Maybe he just feeling protective. The idea touched her heart, and she felt compelled to respond in kind. Since you are going to be gone for a long time, do you need anyone to look after your home? I can keep an eye out, or I know my daughter would be happy to check in from time to time. Things should be fine for now. I'll let you know if that changes. Listen. Sunless paused as someone called his name. A burly awakened was trying to get the master's attention. I have to go. If you'll excuse me. Master Sunless. Noble struggled to find the appropriate words for such a parting. She settled for speaking what was on her mind. The world needs more masters like you who are willing to help. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Sunless waved off her praise. I should be thanking you. Oh. Noble tilted her head. The captain coughed and rubbed the back of his neck. Ah, you know. Thank you for offering to look after my house. Just make sure you are taking good care of your family as well. Keep the whole neighborhood safe while I'm gone. I will try. The professor was deeply moved by his sincerity and care. As long as she remained in the NQSC, Noble would honor the request. It was good to see you. We must be on our way as well. Fort tugged gently on his wife's arm. They really needed to get to the station. Safe journey. Sunless dipped his head and turned to leave. Safe journey. Noble repeated toward his retreating form. She wished him all the luck in the world. As the professor turned to the station, she could not help but feel that a meaningful exchange had taken place. A burden was lifted from her. Alighting the platform, Fort set down the bags to pull out his communicator. He showed the tickets to the conductor, who directed them to the appropriate car. I cannot believe our neighbor is here. And heading to Antarctica, no less. I didn't think he was part of the military. He must have joined just recently. Noble steadied herself as the train began to move. That is certainly big news. I know someone who will be very happy about that fact. And also, someone who will be quite upset. That was how it would probably be with most of those going to fight in Antarctica. They were very welcome to help in the effort to save the world, but would also be missed by those left behind. I do wish him well. Noble looked out the window as they passed through the impossibly high walls. It was hard to say when she would see the port again. Even if she joined up with the army just now, it was unlikely that the professor would make it on the wave of ships that had been floating at the dock. Farewell for now. Noble pulled her gaze away. What are you thinking about? Fort could see his wife's far look. He could always read her moods, sometimes better than she could herself. She moved away from the window, her eyes swirling. Their two suitcases lifted from the bed and moved neatly to a luggage rack. The professor floated to the spot on the bed beside her spouse. You want to know what I am thinking about? I am contemplating the scale of things. This is so much for all of us to bear. And really, what can we do? Looking at the port and thinking about the catastrophe to come, I feel so small. Ford looked out the window at the receding fortress. What? Noble laid her head on the man's shoulder gently. Ford wrapped his arm around his wife and pulled her close. It's just at that same moment I was feeling the opposite. What do you mean? Surely he didn't mean he felt big in the face of such an impossible task. Ford was too humble for such hubris. Sighing, the deputy director collected his thoughts. I know it sounds silly, but even with all your experiences with the nightmare spell, the problem always seemed far removed from me. Like I was dealing with the issue but still outside of it somehow. I only ever saw Seb fall asleep, so even that wasn't enough to make it feel real. It wasn't until the gate opened by our children's school that I got to see the spell up close and personal. Now I cannot get those images out of my head. I dream about them at night. I envision what might have been if not for Mongrel and the heroes who protected them. It had been over a year since that fateful occurrence, yet Noble could feel the deep fear when he spoke just now. It was a fear she shared herself. But these past few days have seen people from all over the globe communicating and coordinating. It reminded me that I am not alone. Humans may be frail individually, but we are a force to be reckoned with when we are united. So after seeing so many willing to plunge headlong into danger, I don't feel small. I feel like I am a part of something bigger. Fort closed his eyes and chuckled. I am rambling, I am sorry. Shaking her head, Noble interlaced her fingers with her husband's. I like it when you talk like that. It gives me hope that someday we will be safe from all this. I want nothing more than to provide a safe place for you and our children. I would go most anywhere and do most anything for a chance to give you some peace. Fort's tone was solemn as if he was making a vow, though Noble was unsure if it was for her or for himself. Peace. The dream realm is more peaceful than our world some days. Once in a while, I imagine us setting up house there. Life would be different, but in some ways, I think it would be simpler. Noble mused. Fort kissed the top of her head with a wry smile. A simple life. Dare to dream, my love. Dare to dream. This is how many barracks will be empty when the first ship arrives, and this is how many people can be held in each. The trading port can absorb some of the overflow, but the numbers still don't work, Noble explained over breakfast. After getting home late the night before, the professor was already hard at work with her mother long before anyone else was awake. It's been too many years since I did this kind of work, Lena rubbed her eyes as she looked at the numbers again. The professor couldn't help but smile. It is still funny to me that you ever did it at all. I don't know how Dad got away with dating and then marrying a subordinate. That must have been quite a scandal. It wasn't like I was his secretary or anything. And I switched departments when we got together. He was never my boss while he was my boyfriend. You watch too many dramas, my dear, Lena clicked her tongue. But you worked alongside him after you got married, Noble protested. She had seen her parents poring over government documents even after they moved to the NQSC. That was only for special projects. He had the big ideas, and I was the organizer. We worked well together. Lena stiffened slightly. You really did. I admire that about you. The professor felt very lucky to have two such loving and dedicated parents. If not for her father's accident, Noble was sure Lance would be neck-deep in this project right alongside them. Are you and Fort all right? The older woman asked cautiously. I know sometimes an extended amount of time together and high stress can bring issues to the surface. What? No, we are fine. I was just missing Dad, that's all. Noble looked back at the page. With this many people coming in about 8 weeks, have you found any solution to housing them? Lena sighed. Like I said, Lance had the ideas. Some other people on the team have put forth a few possibilities though. The first couple of boats should not be a problem. After that, we will begin to have issues. It made some sense. Thousands of people could be absorbed into the populace without much difference, but hundreds of thousands. Millions. That would be strain on a city even under the best circumstances. I was thinking. A rustling in the hallway drew Noble's attention. From the worried emotions emanating from the newcomer, the professor knew her daughter was about to come around the corner. Mom. Noble rose from the kitchen table and hurried to embrace her little girl. Despite being almost 16, Honey melted into her mother's arms. It is good to see you, sweetheart. Noble kissed the girl's forehead. The top of her head had become out of reach only a few months prior. I was afraid you hadn't made it home. Honey's muffled voice was a mix of relief and exhaustion. The teen looked very tired. She must have fallen asleep while waiting up. Noble wanted to let the children rest, but Honey was less and less a child every day. I should have woken you to let you know when we got in. I'm sorry I made you worry. It's fine. I just dreamed you weren't coming back. I am glad it was wrong. Honey blew out her cheeks. Mom, he left again. I know. The professor felt her daughter cling even tighter. I am sorry. At least he said I could keep in touch this time. Lena asked from the table with one eyebrow raised. Noble waved her mother off with a stern expression over Honey's shoulder. She patted the teen on the back. At least you will know if he is safe this time. That's good, right? I still hate it. Honey's eyes stung with tears. I know, baby. Me too. The professor did not like that people came and went from their lives so easily. In her perfect world, everyone she loved would remain together and live in harmony. But the world was far from perfect. It needed to be protected. The two ladies stood there for a long time in a silent hug. Finally Honey lifted her head from her mother's shoulder. "I'm glad you are back," she repeated. "I want to talk more later, but I should get ready for school. How about we go out for a meal tomorrow, just the two of us?" Noble released her daughter. "I'd like that, love you." Honey gave a tired smile as she wiped at her eyes. "Love you too." The awakened sent a tiny bit of comfort for the teen to accept. As Honey turned to leave, Noble furrowed her brow. Something was off. Although she had been gentle with her offering of emotion, something had interfered with the transmission. It was almost like it had to pass through a protective barrier around the girl. That had never happened before. "Are you feeling all right?" Noble called after her daughter. "I am doing better, thank you for the help." Honey smiled a little warmer than she had before. The girl continued to her room, walking a little taller. So she did get the feeling. The professor wasn't sure what to make of the anomaly. "What was that about?" Lena asked when Noble returned to the table. "I don't know." Noble rubbed her forehead. The disturbance did not seem threatening, at least not toward her. Something in Noble felt that if the professor had meant her daughter harm, things would have gone differently. It was a chilling thought. "I can't say for sure what happened." "You don't know what happened to your daughter's boyfriend?" The grandmother scoffed. "Boyfriend? Who said anything about a boyfriend?" All other thoughts suddenly flew from Noble's head. "Didn't you?" Lena tilted her chin in confusion. "What? Oh, no, her trainer left again. He does that. He is joining the Southern campaign." Noble looked toward the window. I know that look." The gray-haired woman smiled. "You've got an idea, maybe. With so many people leaving for Antarctica, that possibly means many homes will be left empty." Noble thought of the home next door. It seemed a shame to let it sit empty. "Could we use those properties for refugees?" "With the owner's permission, of course." "I am not sure, but it isn't a bad idea." Lena noted down the suggestion. "I had already considered asking for volunteers to open their homes once the knowledge of the gates becomes public." "Our home could fit another family," Noble muttered to herself. Of course, they would have to be very careful who they let in their home, but she herself had been taken in when they arrived at the NQSC. It was her turn to step up. "I can as well. It's only me puttering around the house right now. I don't need all that space." Lena gathered her things. "I will get out of your hair before the boys in Fort wake up. You've given me a lot to think about. I'll relay all this information to the group later today unless you would like to come and do it yourself. I have to teach a class at the academy this morning, but you can call me with any questions." Noble hugged her mother goodbye. "Have your phone. I am sure I will be calling you." Lena was more right than she realized. "Yes, mother, I will come back tomorrow. I will adjust my hours at the academy and get back to you. I have to go, I am at my front door. Love you." Noble lowered her communicator with a sigh. She leaned against the door of her house to have a moment to herself. Her first full day back in the NQSC had felt like it would never end. The professor had found 12 messages and 2 missed calls when she finished her morning class. All of them were from Lena. The return call as well as the 2 after it were filled with questions that the rest of the committee had about her findings. "I am not sure where the difficulty is. It is all there in my report." Noble pinched the bridge of her nose. "I know, sweetheart, they are just trying to be thorough," her mother assured her. At the time, the professor had wanted to accuse Lena of scheming to bring her into headquarters, but she knew deep down that was not the case. Her mother was simply relaying the concerns of other group members. "You know what? Things are quiet around here. I will get B2 up to speed on what I need for this afternoon, and I will head your way." Noble picked up her datapad and began the process. "You don't have to do that," Lena began. The professor clicked her tongue. "Too late, I have already started. I'll be there in an hour and a half. Thank you." The older lady ended the call. That exchange had led to a whirlwind of an afternoon. The committee had bombarded her with all sorts of questions. Some Noble knew and others that would never have occurred to her. Who cared how many spoons were at the port? As long as there was enough food, people could eat with their hands if needed. But the professor kept those judgments to herself. Exhausted, Noble had finally excused herself to head home. And thanks to her mother's phone call just now, she had agreed to go back tomorrow. What did I get myself into? At least it was still early enough in the year that her academy duties were manageable. If they were in full swing, there would be no hope of her getting everything done. The door to her home opened suddenly. Blaze looked at his mom with a confused expression. "You aren't the food delivery guy." "Hello to you too," Noble chuckled. Then she held up the to-go bag in her hand. And not every delivery person has to be a guy. Blaze threw the door open wide. Mom's here, and she has food. The young man ran off. Give us 5 minutes to get everything set up, Ford called after his son. He walked over to shut the door. Thanks for picking that up. Ford kissed his wife as he took the bag from her hands and placed it on the counter. Thanks for ordering it. I wasn't up for cooking. Noble set down the rest of her things and went to grab some plates. I think the only thing either of us ready for is an early bedtime. The deputy director smiled wearily. I heard you were at headquarters today. I was. Turns out that being there in person is important here too. Noble placed the plates and silverware on the table. I know what you mean. Now that I am back, I have unofficially become the point of contact between the NQSC and the port. Until the ships leave next week, I will be stuck working almost non-stop. They have promised to promote me to a directorship to make sure things get done. It's nice to be wanted. Noble shook her head. Seems we are in the same boat. I am glad you were able to make it home tonight. We still need to have that talk. The deputy director reminded her, his voice soft. I haven't forgotten. You mean the one where one of us needed to change our mind? The professor looked at her husband, her eyes swirled a soft blue. That is the one. Ford nodded, his gaze searched hers for answers. But they would have to wait. Their time was up. The boys came bounding in, followed a moment later by their older sister. She looked much more herself than she had that morning, much to Noble's relief. Dinner is served. Ford grinned, and if I may say so, I really outdid myself with the cooking this time. Honey clicked her tongue. She looked at the bags still sitting on the counter. Unless you changed your name to K-Bot's Diner, I think I will have to give any compliments to a different chef. The meal was excellent and the cleanup easy. Before long, the kids headed off to their rooms to finish their schoolwork before indulging in some shows or video games. In the living room, things got very quiet. Noble and Ford sat on the largest couch staring at each other. I know it was a long day, Ford sighed, and you might not want to talk about things now. It was a long day, but a good one. I know I complained when I got home, but I feel like progress was made. That feeling was nice. Noble straightened her shoulders. I am ready. Let's talk about Antarctica. I support you if you want to go. I don't think I am meant to go. The two voices overlapped. Silence took over once more as they processed each other's words. I guess we both changed our minds. Noble bit her lip. What made you come around? I witnessed how you protected our train from derailing and took down a fierce nightmare creature. I can see how big the need will be in Antarctica. If you want to use your strength and talent to protect others, you should have that chance. Ford reached out and squeezed his wife's hand. I appreciate you saying that. But I think I must stay here. Noble felt even more firm in her belief. Ford's initial objections had made her stubborn. His releasing of that control made everything much easier. I did defeat the bludgeoner, but it almost cost me my life simply because I hit the ground. I would be a liability to any team in Antarctica, at least as things are right now. Maybe that will change in the future. Now that people on the train saw I can float, I think I will practice some aerial sparring with Sarai to increase my skills. Seems reasonable. Ford tried to remain neutral, but Noble could sense his relief. She was glad he liked having her around. But beyond even that, she continued, I do not want to leave all of you unprotected. With so many awakened headed south, someone needs to stay here. Seeing our daughter's upset face this morning nearly broke me. I am going back tomorrow to help Mom. Who knows, I might be able to do a lot more good here fighting to get people help than I ever could fighting with my blade. The professor paused and bit her lip. Am I being selfish? You are more worried about being a liability to other soldiers than you are about your own death. You are the least selfish person I know, Ford countered. You would never choose your own comfort over doing what is right. It is something I love about you. I feel the same way about you. You were willing to let me go across the world even if it meant you might lose me. Are you crazy? She gave him a small smile. I think we both are, but that is beside the point. Here, there, or anywhere, we still have a lot of good to do. But before any of that, Ford kissed his wife. I need to make sure to do that as much as humanly possible. Noble smiled. That is something we can both agree on. Noble looked out at the line of people. How were there so many of them? It was one thing to know how many refugees were expected. It was quite different to see so many stretched out before her. And that was only those who could fit inside the shelter. As much as the government tried, there simply wouldn't be enough space in the NQSC to absorb how many were coming. And it had only been a few weeks since the first group arrived. They had taken longer to arrive than expected, but when they did, the people came in full force and all at once. It was overwhelming. This line was proof of the problem. Unfortunately, the small amount of available houses were already allotted for the day and those who were left could only get a meal of synthpast and another night in the temporary shelters. Noble glanced around at one of the lodgings. The building was similar to the ones Noble had seen at the port, a big box that could be torn down at a moment's notice. But somehow the awakened did not think it would be able to move anytime soon. Beds were all around her, pulled into tight family groups. Other bedding was set up on the hard floor. It was summertime, so the room was unusually warm with all the extra bodies. The professor had only come down to lend a hand in making sure the new dwellings were passed out fairly, but then the sight of so many in need tugged at her heartstrings. So she had stayed to help in what ways she could. That had been hours ago. Just now Noble gave her brightest smile to each one who made it to the front of the line. She had been in their shoes, though not to the same extent. As one of the first to escape North America and the daughter of a prominent government official, Noble had been whisked straight to comfortable lodgings until they found a new home. How much different would her life have been if she had needed to reside in the outskirts indefinitely while hoping for a chance to start fresh? The overcrowding would only get worse before it got better, if it ever got better. Think positive. They need a friendly face in all the gloom. With a light cough, Noble went back to passing out what little food the government could supply. Synthpast, nothing could really make that palatable. Yet those in line would fight for a chance to get some to feed themselves and their loved ones. The refugees were supposed to provide proof of their status before getting help, but the professor had intentionally not checked a few of the more raggedy members in the queue. She didn't want to turn people away, especially people who had been stuck in poverty for years. You can only do so much, she reminded herself. A woman made it to the front of the line with a somber expression. In her arms, a child of around 3 clung to her mother's thin frame. "Hello," Noble said brightly. "Aren't you adorable?" The child, who was already small for her age, shrank against her mother's shoulder. By their clothing, the pair had led a comfortable life before arriving on distant shores. Since the fabric was only slightly worn, they looked like some of the newest arrivals. That was why the child wasn't used to the line just yet. "Hattie's a little shy," the woman explained. "Her father had a way with her that I just can't master." The third member of their little family was dead. While he might have died by the chain of nightmares ravaging Antarctica, Noble didn't think so. The matter-of-fact statement was devoid of raw emotion. "I don't blame Hattie for being a little shy. She's lucky to have you." Noble passed over the synthpast with a pleasant expression. "I have something for you, Hattie." The child turned and peeked at the awakened with a hint of curiosity. "A gift." Noble reached into her satchel and pulled out a small stuffed animal. Its green body and long legs were comical, but its big eyes gave it an endearing quality. The little girl tentatively reached out to grab the stuffed toy before clutching it to her chest. Froggy had belonged to Honey years ago, and Noble had found it in the bottom of her closet that morning. With the teen's permission, the professor had brought the toy to give it a new home. That home was Hattie's arms. Noble could feel the girl's anxiety immediately lessen. That was a good sign. Her mother could feel it too. "What do you say to the nice lady?" she coaxed. "Thank you." A bit of the stoic expression melted from the child's face as she allowed a small smile. "You are most welcome. He and your mom will take good care of you." Noble nodded as the pair went away. The interaction had taken less than a minute, but the professor hoped that the small act had brightened their day. They could all use a little more sunshine around here. Or better yet, some cleansing rain. Not the acid rain that usually fell, but the once-in-a-blue moon rain that washed everything clean. The air here was not filtered, and it was unpleasant to breathe. A bit of natural filtering would go a long way. Wishful thinking. Noble shook her head and continued serving until they ran out of supplies. The rest would be the first in line to get food tomorrow. Things would only get worse as more people came. Noble guessed the other quadrants would be equally swamped. How could they not be with so many needing to flee to their shores? If only there was another place to put them all. But Earth had limited resources, and they were becoming more limited with each passing day. Looking out at the crowd, it felt like a losing battle. For each person the government found a place to live, there would be more who would still need help. It was an impossible task. And not my job, Noble reminded herself. Her family had opened their home to one family already, but they had moved out a few days before to a more permanent place. Fort told her that morning that they would likely get another family assigned to them soon. Noble hoped this one would be as nice as the last. With the rest of the government employees, she gathered up the empty boxes and prepared to go. Her heart clenched. Digging around in her satchel, Noble passed a small bag of food to a woman and her infant son. It was her sack lunch that she had felt guilty eating in front of hungry people. She would be home soon enough to have dinner anyway. The young mother looked on the verge of tears. No thanks were needed. The others in her group chatted idly as they walked to the train station. Most were glad to get back to the comforts inside the NQSC. Noble just wanted to get home to her family. Her communicator buzzed. Looking down at the screen, the professor hummed softly. What? One of the men resisted the urge to peek over her shoulder. Noble looked at him and smiled. Oh, nothing. My daughter just wants me to hurry home. She took one more look at her communicator and her smile faltered. Honey's 3 words made her more anxious than she wanted to admit. Tonight's the night. Noble knew exactly what Honey meant. There was no way either of them could forget. The professor had promised her daughter to tell her the truth about things on her 16th birthday. Unfortunately, that day had been a little chaotic. Celebration with friends and family had meant that the 2 ladies were unable to have the anticipated conversation. The following weeks were just as busy. The announcement of the evacuation of Antarctica as well as a big push for people to join the Second Army had overshadowed everyday life in a way that could not be easily defined. But that wasn't the full picture. If Noble were being honest with herself, she was reluctant to have the heart-to-heart. It wasn't because she didn't trust Honey with the information. Far from it, her daughter would be able to keep the secret. The reason she hadn't told Honey things as she had promised was illogical. Until Noble had followed through with her promise, the professor did not have to admit that her daughter was actually 16. And until she was 16, the spell would be forced to leave Honey alone. Of course, the spell was not beholden to the professor's whims, but it was all she could do to keep her worry at bay. Superstitious nonsense. Noble chided herself. Having put the fear behind her, Noble allowed her daughter to name the time and date of the big reveal. As Honey's message has said, tonight was the night. Noble would come clean. Among other things, Honey would find out about the professor's flaw and first nightmare. The teen would also discover that her mother was Queen Bee. Noble was both anxious and a tad excited about the last part. As Fireshing had pointed out in their sparring match the day before. She isn't going to believe it until she sees it for herself. It was fun to think about how the girl would react. Honey had grown so much in the past 3 months since Noble had returned from the port. The teen looked more like a woman and less like a girl every day. The next 2 years would be a roller coaster ride. Fortunately, Honey had not felt sleepy yet. She isn't Seb, she is her own person. Bidding her companions farewell as they took their own paths, Noble boarded her first light rail train on her journey home. This one would exit the outskirts so that she could switch to another and make it home in time for dinner. Her stomach rumbled, but she ignored it. Awakened didn't need food as often as others. She would be fine. Before she could select a seat, the door shut and the train began to move with a jolt. It wasn't much, but it was enough to knock a piece of fruit from a passenger's hand. Real fruit in the outskirts. That was very rare indeed. The ruby apple rolled down the length of the train, hungry eyes watching and trying to decide if it was worth the fight. It wasn't. Noble reached down to pick up the fruit. Her fingers stung terribly, but she managed a smile. "Be careful with that," she said as she passed the food back to its owner. The young man dipped his head. "I will." Finding a seat, the professor examined her hand. "Not as bad as the last time," she observed. "I finally think I am building up a tolerance." Being thrown to the ground by the bludgeoner 3 months before had been a wake-up call. It showed Noble just how frail she really was. Since that time, the professor had touched the ground at least once a day. Of course, she could never be immune to her flaw, but Noble theorized that perhaps she could fight the effects slightly through repeated exposure. Noble had touched the ground longer than was strictly necessary just then, and yet she had managed to make it through. Her hand felt like it was being bitten by a million ants, but there was no nausea from the encounter. Her ability to handle the pain was improving. That's progress. Settling into her seat, Noble began scrolling on her communicator. Most of the news was praising the evacuation efforts and downplaying the severity of the gates. Noble wasn't sure how to feel about that. It was good not to create a huge amount of panic, but it also felt incredibly dishonest. Tales of Mongrel's heroism, at least, did not seem to be exaggerated. Though I don't get why some of these articles call him a woman. Noble furrowed her brow. Are they crazy? Frey, for his part, was the most realistic in his reporting. But his reports about Antarctica were always brief, probably to prevent painting too bleak a picture. And things there were very bleak. While the people who had made it to the NQSC so far had all been from eastern Antarctica, the news from the Antarctic Circle was nothing but bad. Of course, Ford couldn't, or at least wouldn't, give her all the details, but the snippets she had caught while helping her mother told her that the area was a lost cause. While not the most populated part of Antarctica, many had lost their lives. By the time she needed to change trains, Noble was in an even more somber mood. Try as she might to ignore it, Noble could vividly picture what was happening in the frozen land across the sea. Visions of the past followed her like wraiths onto the light rail that would take her toward her neighborhood. I need to cheer myself up before I get home, or at least get my mind in a different place. She needed something, anything, to distract her mind or keep it occupied. The professor knew just the thing. Unfortunately, there were no seats just now on the car Noble was boarding. That was fine. Noble wasn't really able to sit anyway. She grabbed the handrail overhead and waited for the train to move. They were barely on their way when a young man with eyes like honey droplets cleared his throat. Please take my seat, he offered. It was an unnecessary gesture, but a kind one, and Noble needed a little bit of kindness just then. She smiled at him warmly. Thank you. The thin young man shifted to trade places with her. You are welcome. Even awakened need breaks now and then. Do I look that worn out? Noble brushed the stray hairs back into her ponytail. The other passenger rubbed the back of his neck. More like you looked a little too deep in thought. I am sorry if I was being presumptuous. Not at all. I appreciate the thought. Noble held out her open palm. Thanks again, Aiden. The man courteously dipped his head. Thanks again, Aiden. It's nice to meet you. The track lifted into the air, giving them an aerial view of that part of the city. It's surreal, isn't it? To think about all that is happening at this moment within view of that window. Impossible to fathom really. Aiden had a far-off gaze. Noble wondered what adventures he was imagining were happening, but decided to let the man have his daydream. The only safe place to dream was while awake, and there was no way that the professor would take that away. When Aiden finally came back from his long reverie, his eyes opened wide. What is that? This? Noble glanced up from her inspection at the surprised man. She held up the little black ball so he could get a closer look. Aiden stared politely with raised eyebrows. It's called the portcullis key, the professor answered casually. I study it to clear my head sometimes. Study it? Do you not know what it does? Aiden seemed both bothered and intrigued by the little ball in her hand. I do, mostly. Noble had run many tests over the ball in the past couple of years. After the city train had come to a sudden stop, Noble had discovered that the ball seemed to feed off of emotions, mainly fear. That was a problem. She could use her own genuine fear to power the ball, but trying to force the feeling of fear did not work. Of course, she could have made the people around her afraid with her ability, but that seemed highly unethical and even cruel just for her to be able to activate an enchantment. Thanks to her experiment at the movie theater and a few more proof of concepts, after that by going to other horror films Noble had been able to prove the little orb could permeate walls and let the user pass through like there was nothing there. Strangely, the information had only made Catfine even less inclined to get back the memory. Before leaving with the army, her beautiful former student had only made 2 requests, to keep an eye out for her brother and to remember the key. The first part was easy. The boy was in Honey's class at school, and Noble checked in with the young man weekly to make sure he had all he needed. She made sure to let Cat know how he was feeling and if he was remotely tired. Honey, of course, noticed the sudden attention. The teen had accused Noble of trying to fix them up until her mother had explained the situation. After that, Honey did what she could to make sure Catfine's brother had at least one friend he could talk to. The second part of Cat's request had seemed unnecessary. Noble studied memories as part of her job. It was unlikely that she would forget about one in her possession. Especially one as fascinating as a little ominous ball. That would be like telling a duck not to swim. If ducks were still around, that was. If you know what it is, then why study it? Aiden asked. His honest question brought a smile to Noble's face. To honor a friend's request, she answered. Because there was no reasonable way to activate the enchantment, Noble had used the strange, almost imperceptible patterns of the memory to distract and entertain her on long rides. The current trip across the NQSC still had another half-hour before she would be close to her station. Which meant there was plenty of time to get lost in the tenebrous mystery in her hand. If Aiden was confused by her answer, he did not say so. "That's nice," he smiled and gave a short nod. The pair fell into another comfortable silence. The world whizzed by them while the train continued its never-ending path. Looking at the key, Noble watched the streaks change at different intervals. She had theorized that they were the emotions of the people around her, but there was no proof this was true. Her only reason for thinking this was that when she was alone in her protected dojo, there was less fluctuation in the shadowy discoloration. And it is going wild right now. With so many people coming in and out of its range, Noble could sense hundreds, even thousands of different emotions at any given time. If she opened herself up fully to the sensation, she could easily get lost. When the professor first acquired the ability, it had taken some time to learn how to separate and ignore extra stimuli. Now it was second nature to have her feelings in the forefront, the person she was focused on second, and everyone else in the periphery. Only occasionally did those things go out of order, like when Sleepless had fueled Noble with his anger or when Lost had pushed his senses on her own. Fortunately, those instances were few and far between. The portcullis key glowed for a moment as the train descended to the next stop. Noble wondered who was having a bad enough day to cause the ball to react in such a way. People's responses to things were often unpredictable. Hopefully tonight will not induce any fear. It was possible that the information on Noble's flaw would affect Honey deeply. It would be disorienting to learn that one of the closest people to you was never really touching the ground and could float away if she fell asleep in the wrong place. Maybe I should lead with that in my first nightmare and end with the dreamscape. That way things can end on a high note. Though doing it the other way around was tempting as well. Once Honey knew her secret identity, surely everything else would pale in comparison. No, I need her to take what I say seriously. If she is picturing me in Duels, she won't listen to anything that comes after. With that, Noble began crafting her speech. This was somehow much harder than other parental talks that the woman had needed to give. Instead of speaking about the birds and the bees, she would be speaking about only one bee herself. The personal nature of the talk was part of the issue. Too little information and Honey might not get the full picture of how things were. But too much information would qualify as oversharing. She didn't want to give the girl secondhand trauma. It will all be fine. Perhaps I should just take the questions as they come and go from there. As she thought, the train had raised and lowered into yet another station. This one was still more than 20 minutes from home. Time felt like it was crawling. The doors opened and people filtered in and out. Their emotions filtered in and out of Noble's consciousness with them. The professor looked up and surveyed the newcomers. One of their emotional signatures caught her attention immediately. Can it be? Noble furrowed her brow. A stately man wearing a gray jacket entered the car with a grim expression. The government insignia on his collar and his imposing aura made others give him a wide berth. Clearly, the powerful awakened was not someone to be trifled with. As he entered, his curly hair was blown against his light brown skin. It would have been mesmerizing if the man had not been so forbidding. The most notable thing, though, was the man's hands. Even though it was swelteringly warm, the seer wore gloves to prevent accidentally touching any of the unwashed masses around him. A moment after passing through the doors, the man's piercing eyes met Noble's. Emmer. The word escaped her mouth unconsciously. The scowl on the emissary's face gave way to a look of pure, unfiltered dread. Nope. Emmer turned around, and fled. The single word and his sudden change in demeanor were a shock to Noble's system. It had been a long time since they had last spoken, after which Emmer had abruptly cut off communication. He had been angered when she touched his hand accidentally. Her carelessness had brought about some vision of calamity in the emissary's mind. Emmer had been very displeased with her. What had he said? May we never meet again, at least in the waking world. The words came back and crashed against Noble's consciousness. If the seer was running right now, there was a good reason for all of them to be. Everyone needs to get off the train, Noble muttered. What? Aiden could barely make out her mumbling. Everyone needs to get off the train. Now. This time her words were said with conviction. But this isn't my stop, the golden-eyed man explained even as the woman stood and pulled up the person next to her. Noble began pushing those around her to the exit, trying not to hurt them while urging them out. Hadn't they seen the other awakened run? If they had noticed at all, they probably just assumed he owed her money or something else that did not concern them. "Get off the train," she screamed again. The doors were going to shut any moment. "Did you not see that man flee? Follow him." "Are you all right, ma'am?" Aiden asked, his eyes filled with concern. Noble sighed at his use of ma'am. She couldn't blame him. That was who they were seeing. A professor and a humanitarian worker. For an awakened, she looked rather unassuming in her high ponytail and light gray outfit. Her goal had been to not stand out too much in the outskirts, but that mentality was counterproductive now. Everything in her screamed that she needed to act fast. Something was about to happen, and Noble needed to get everyone off the train. Yet, just now the passengers were all looking at each other and gossiping quietly about her ranting. Noble needed a commanding presence to make them listen. Unfortunately, the only way she knew to do that easily was to make herself more recognizable. "I'm going to regret this." Seeing no other option, Noble summoned the familiar black and gold armor. The delicate lines of the fraudulent facade formed across her face. Aiden blinked. "QueenBee, get off the train." The force in her voice captivated the attention of those around her. The young man next to her was the first to come to his senses. "You heard the queen. Get off before the doors shut. She can talk," one of the other passengers muttered. Bee wanted to smack her forehead. Instead, she sent a jolt of fear into those still standing in place. That was the final push they needed. People began to stampede to the exits. The doors started to shut, but the passengers, in their newfound fervor, pushed them back open and stalled their progress. They squeezed and pressed until the car was empty. Trying to help the others, Aiden was the last one off. He hesitated at the door and looked back at QueenBee. An unformed question lay on his lips. "Keep running," she ordered. "But why?" he asked at last. The slender young man had been helpful in her goal, but Aiden wanted to know the reason behind being stranded at a stop that wasn't his. She understood, but there was no time to explain. The doors were free and closing fast. "Just go." Noble used her ability to lift the man and put him on the platform before it was too late. "I'm sorry," she whispered, knowing he couldn't hear. In truth, she wasn't yet sure why. Her responses were based on intuition and the little information she had. As the train took off, Noble wondered if she should clear the other two cars of people. Or would it have been better for her to get off the train instead? The professor didn't know if a calamity was going to befall her simply because she was on the train, or was she the calamity about to happen? Awakened did snap on occasion. An evil version of herself could do a lot of damage. That was a chilling thought. Was she about to lose her mind and go on a rampage? "I don't think so. I feel fine." Except she didn't. Something in her soul was unsettled. It was difficult to put into words at first, but then as it grew stronger, a knot formed in her stomach. The audible cacophony of unearthly screams grew steadily more pronounced. No, 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 no. There was no denying what she was hearing. It was the call. The portcullis key in Noble's hand glowed brightly. How could it not? She was petrified. Looking out the window only confirmed her deepest fear was true. In front of her, reality wavered. The view of the city bent and refracted at odd angles like it might be splitting in two. Because it was. In barely a moment, the fabric of space and time would be ripped apart, causing a hole to tear open the sky. Or rather, a gate. Her communicator on the seat buzzed feverishly. "Emergency alert, emergency alert, gate activity detected in your proximity. ETA, imminent." You think? Noble wanted to throw the device across the train. It wasn't the communicator's fault, but there was nothing else to blame for the current problem. And it was a massive problem. The last line of the message gave the only advice it could: evacuate immediately. That is what she had already tried to do for those in the train car. She had likely saved all those people's lives. Instinctively, she pressed the blinking symbol in the corner of the screen. The world around her slowed to a crawl. Attention all awakened. Request immediate action. Noble steadied herself for the information underneath. Her mind raced as she studied the words. Gate category. 2, 75% probability, 3, 24% probability, higher undefined. Strike force ETA, 5 minutes 47 seconds. The first piece of information was arguably good news. It wasn't a Category 5 gate most likely. If it ended up being a Category 2, then that was really the best case scenario, all things considered. The second part of the message was not terrible, though still regrettable. Noble sighed. Under 6 minutes was a remarkably fast response time, but as the gate was already in the process of forming, it was 5 minutes and 47 seconds too late. Any moment, the gate would finish solidifying and unleash untold horrors on the residents of the NQSC. Even now the far-off track was being scissored by the developing rift. Pieces of it crumbled and tumbled down. Racing forward, the train would never make it to another station. The professor was left with two choices. She could fly away from the danger or face it. There was no need for a debate. Hadn't the beautiful awakened stayed behind from Antarctica to protect and serve the people of her city? Just now they needed her protection more than ever. As much as she hated it, there was only one option. Gritting her teeth, Noble repeated the 3 words she never thought she would say. Stand and fight. Quoting Mongrel now, are we? Noble clicked her tongue at her own foolishness. Yet somehow the words had also given her strength. Her clarity returned. While the gate was still wavering, the professor knew what she had to do. With the few remaining seconds, she needed to get people off of the train immediately. And she knew exactly how to do it. Clutching the portcullis key, Noble passed through the ceiling of the train like a ghost. There were only 3 long cars and an engine on this light rail. Hopefully, there would be time enough to stop the train and evacuate the passengers. Floating the length of the roof, she passed into the engineer's control room. The woman, who was already panicking, turned white as a sheet as upon Noble's arrival. Nightmare creature, she half asked, half screamed. Queen Bee realized that the mask, armor, and sudden entrance were likely not the best first impression. No, the lady did not wait for the complete answer. Her eyes rolled back in her head as she crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Well, that's a problem. Noble looked at the large panel in front of her. There were plenty of buttons and switches, but none clearly labeled stop. She could press all of them and hope for the best, but that seemed foolish. Since Bee had no time to learn the controls of the train, she abandoned her hope of halting it and resorted to completing the second part of her plan. Getting everyone off as quickly as possible. Starting with the woman on the ground. This just got a lot harder. The professor tucked the portcullis key into her armor. Scooping the lady up in her arms, Noble exited through the top of the train. Thankfully, they both passed through without issue. There was a possibility that the key would only help the person who wielded it, but with how much fear was bubbling in the city, it had more than enough power to take them both out of the metal prison. As soon as they were free of the train, the floating awakened released her grip on the engineer and floated her to the ground. Hopefully, the woman would wake up in time to run. But there wasn't time to make sure that happened. There were still 2 cars full of people. Glad I already cleared one at least. Without having acted on her instincts, Noble would have found the task impossible to complete. As it was, she was not sure if it was a realistic goal. I cannot let these people die. So she immediately went to work. Entering the first car through the roof, Noble found the people inside were already beginning to lose hope. 37 people. Not as bad as it could be. Noble used the combination of her abilities to gauge how many bodies were in the car. As she opened her eyes, they swirled, surveying all of the frightened faces. Queen Bee, are you here to save us? One man screamed as he gripped the handrail. That's the plan. Bee's modulated voice came out through the fraudulent facade. Cover your ears. Already she had called a small hammer into her hand. The memory fully formed as she hit it against the front window. With a deafening boom, the glass shattered along with the rest of the windows in the car. Even the door was slightly ajar. Everyone climb out and I'll lower you to the ground safely. Noble was relatively sure she could do it. She had once helped out in the boys' talent show by juggling dozens of balls using her aspect. This was fundamentally the same concept, just with much bigger objects to keep in the air, or at least lower through it. Most people hesitated, but a lone gentleman, more scared of the gate than the ground, pushed his way out of the door and jumped. Her eyes swirling in every sort of color, Noble focused on the falling human to slow his descent. The man landed on the ground unharmed. Seeing his success, the others followed in his path. Only the last couple needed Noble to force them out of the steel carriage and toward the ground. Even as the final person was heading out of the window, Noble was passing through the roof. She could have gone out of the window, but she would have lost all her speed. Coming out on the roof meant she could keep pace with the train without any issues. And since there was plenty of fear, the portcullis key was brimming with boundless energy. Noble could feel it pulsing with power. One more to go. Queen Bee dove into the final car, almost passing through a person with the key's power. She managed to stop just in time before finding out if passing through living beings was even possible. That could get messy, Engross. Cover your ears. Noble repeated the process with the rolling thunder. Only this time, since the memory had been out longer, the boom was more forceful. Careful, you'll make their ears bleed. Jump. After the initial instruction, Noble couldn't wait anymore. She began to force people out of the car. Toward the back of the compartment, a gentleman was holding on desperately to his infant son. He seemed as reluctant to go as he did to stay. Noble couldn't blame him, he had another life depending on him. When he prepared to jump out of the broken door, the child wormed his way from his father's arms and fell back into the cabin. The man screamed, but his feet had already left the floor. The family was separated. The tiny remaining passenger looked back at Noble with large, innocent eyes. The train continued down the tracks, threatening to smash the awakened and child into the nascent gate. Not on my watch. Queen Bee dismissed the hammer and flew the length of the car. Catching the child by the waist, she continued forward. The pair passed through the back wall and into the open air. "Where is your father?" she asked the startled little one. The child didn't answer, but as they lowered to the ground, a lone figure came racing toward them. Nico. The man rushed toward his child. Noble released the boy into his parents' arms. Run. The man did not need any encouragement. Grabbing Nico, he ran as fast as his legs could carry him away from the danger. The floating awakened only hoped it was fast enough. Behind her, the train finally met the end of the track. Without hesitation, it flew from the rail, launched into the air, hit the wavering gate, and exploded. While the fiery bits of mangled train car were still falling from the sky, an especially strong tremor ran through the ground. A hurricane-force wind barreled down the empty street, pulling Bee toward the rift. The light changed and shifted as if the sun no longer controlled shadows. Then an invisible shockwave shot out of the burgeoning breach. Glass all around her shattered as Bee resisted the push. Then, the feeling which had only been an inkling before burst upon her in its full glory. Her soul felt compelled to answer the call, which meant only one thing. The gate had opened. The gate was open. Any moment creatures would pour out and wreak havoc on anyone and anything in their path. Don't panic. Isn't this what she had wanted? A chance to redeem herself after not being able to defend her children at their school. A chance to justify her choice to remain behind while others fought valiantly in Antarctica. A chance to prove to herself and the world that Queen Bee can do more than just perform well in the dreamscape. Not a very good chance if I end up dead. Noble hurried toward the gate. At the very least, she needed to hold off the first wave until the strike force team could arrive to take over. The first wave should be mostly dormant creatures. For an awakened like her, that should not be too much of an issue. It will be fine. Summoning her S-stock, Queen Bee came to land right before the cracked asphalt met the towering void. The gate was wider than the street and as tall as the buildings around it. In it were vague shapes of the approaching doom. 6 other awakened were already at the precipice ready to fight. They were not the strike team, and judging by their emotions, none of them were hardened warriors except for perhaps the one closest to her. Unlike the others, his face was set in a determined line. The awakened glanced her direction while his battle-axe was poised for action. "Good to see you, Queen Bee." By his lack of surprise, he had seen her train rescue a few moments before. "I'm Willie," he continued. "Glad you could join us for the fun." Noble wanted to ask him what his aspect was, perhaps form a battle plan with him and the others there. But before she could open her mouth to coordinate, the shadows hidden in the darkness suddenly burst forth. The creatures were 1.5 meters high and nearly twice as long. Mandibles protruded from their round heads, clicking with deadly force. Behind them, 2 empty eye sockets stared out unseeing and brimming with darkness. Their segmented bodies looked rotten and decayed, with chitin covering the places remaining of the insect's armored exoskeleton. On 6 sharp legs, the abominations lumbered forward, cracking the asphalt with each lurching step. On the top of each head, 2 wiry antennas twitched at unnatural angles. The professor took a deep breath. "Blind. That's good, right?" Noble lifted and prepared to slice the first creature with her unlikely end. But just as she was about to lop off the gigantic ant's head, the abomination turned its unseeing gaze in her direction. Instead of cutting through the creature's neck, it landed right between the empty eyes and slashed between the clacking mandibles. The result, however, was the same. "You have slain a dormant beast, decrepit harvester. Guess they can sense with their antennae," Bee noted. "I won't make that mistake twice." Looking beside her, a half-dozen gigantic insects lay at the awakened's feet. "Make a barrier," Willie called in the momentary break. It was a good idea. The more of the hole that was blocked by bodies, the harder it would be for the remaining creatures to enter their world. Any amount of stalling was a boon. Every second counts. How long has it been? Noble hadn't been counting, but now she wished she had. Had it been 1 minute? 2? It was anyone's guess. Fight like no help is coming, she decided. Nothing was certain until the strike team was there. She needed to hold the line or die trying. Lifting the ant, she tossed the creature toward the border of the rift. But that millisecond of planning was the only respite they got. The relative quiet of the gate ended in a flurry of motion. Hundreds of members of the Harvester colony burst from the darkness into the NQSC, full of murderous fury. With cruel precision, bees slashed, hacked, and skewered the insects as they dared to enter her world. The voice of the spell resounded in her ears, sometimes overlapping itself. Legs, heads, and segmented bodies began to pile around her as she was covered in their fetid blood. Thankfully, she did not have to stand on the fallen monsters to continue fighting. As soon as the pile got too high, bees simply floated higher and continued to fight. The ants, in contrast, had to scurry over their dead to attack their foe. Not that any of them seemed to notice. Their singular goal was destruction. Beside her, none of the other 6 awakened seemed seriously hurt or wounded. They were, however, beginning to drown in the sheer number of abominations. The man closest to her, Willie, seemed to have some aspect related to brute strength. With an axe in one hand, he was simply crushing the skulls of the dormant creatures with the other. "Watch your back," he screamed. The awakened to his left had allowed one of the harvesters to slip behind the line. Now the monster was back for revenge. The warning had come just in time. The acrobatic fighter noted the threat and performed what appeared to be an infinite amount of flips to get away. Then with a spinning rope attached to daggers, the awakened shredded the creature until there was nothing left. Seeing the victory, the lady at the far end gave a single final smile before plunging back into the heat of battle. Whatever her aspect was, she always seemed to find the weakest point of the creatures and exploit them to great effect. Although her hits were not as constant as the other awakened, each strike was used to the greatest effect. The group was not exactly fighting as a cohesive unit, but they were holding back the tide as best they could. The low level of the nightmare creatures was offset by the sheer volume of the enemy involved. Noble pressed the unlikely end into the empty eye socket of one of the harvesters and was rewarded with the voice of the spell in her mind. Another one down, too many to go. No single kill was taking too much from the queen, but over time the exertion was adding up. "I'm not too tired yet, but I cannot keep going like this forever." Mere minutes had passed, but it felt like hours. The pile of creatures was beginning to look like a barricade. While a few slipped through Bee's defenses, for the most part, she was keeping a firm line. That was not to say she was completely unharmed. In order to attack effectively, she also had to sacrifice by taking a few hits along the way. Just now one of the snapping mandibles had caught her across her cheekbone, nearly unmasking her. In return for the blow, Bee thrust her estoc into the creature's mouth and activated its enchantment. Its desiccated flesh disintegrated. With an angry hiss, the ant was no more. Behind her, she could sense a change. While still looking forward, she used her special vision to sense what was happening behind her. Shapes of awakened entered her mind along with the military vehicles operated by mundane soldiers. All of them were barreling toward her at top speed. The strike force had finally arrived. There was only one problem. Noble furrowed her brow. What in 2 worlds? Noble summoned the rolling thunder while she stalled, allowing the cavalry to draw near. When they got close, mundane bullets began to dig into the insects with lightning speed. The cover allowed Bee to find the perfect moment to wield her memory. Tucking her estoc into her belt, she swung the mighty hammer into one of the harvester's sides. The resulting boom sent a shockwave down the line of the enemy. The closest nightmare creatures were pulverized into a fine mist while those farther away were merely injured or stunned. As Noble was able to direct the blast, none of her allies were harmed. The action gave her a momentary breather when the army reached her. She turned around for a second to get a proper look at the incoming force. The awakened riding in the front vehicle was wearing dark glasses along with his army uniform. His black hair was cropped close to his head and he wore a grim expression. "Captain Stice," the head of the strike force announced as he leapt from the armored PTV. "Where are the rest of you?" Queen Bee asked. She had seen news stories of gates opening and the strike forces that closed them down. There should have been at least double or triple what was present just now. "We're it," Stice answered, his mouth pulled tight. A cold realization came over Noble with those words. So many had gone to Antarctica that the forces left behind were spread thin. This was what the NQSC had to offer. As far as Noble knew, none of the clans had homes near this location. Even if they came, it was unlikely that they would be there in too much of a hurry. She and the 24 awakened and the 100 mundane soldiers there were all that stood between the gate and humanity. Looks like I'm not going anywhere. The professor had hoped that when the strike force arrived, she might be able to fade into the background and assist the trained fighters. But it wasn't meant to be. Then we will do our best. Noble smiled at the captain even though she knew he could not see it behind her mask. Seeming to get the message, Stice gave a short nod. All help is welcome. Next wave incoming, Willie yelled. His axe was covered in blood, but he raised it determinedly, unwilling to show any weakness. Noble could feel the strange shift as well. It wasn't just another wave of creatures. It was the second stage. She traded out her hammer for the estoc at her side. Bring it. Captain Stice turned to his men. Hold the line and spread out, now. Dingo. I've got it, sir. One of the soldiers drove an armored vehicle off toward the other end. Before the strike team could get in place, hundreds of decrepit harvesters burst forth from the gate and over the barrier of corpses. And they were not alone. An unfamiliar noise joined the clacking of the hungry mandibles. Buzzing. Above them, awakened abominations burst forth from the rift. Two small, translucent wings fluttered above hulking frames. The flying creatures looked almost humanoid with their long limbs ending in massive, sharp claws. Their muscular black bodies were punctuated by large tufts of yellow fur protruding from their necks. Golden liquid dripped from each gaping maw as sharp fangs threatened to rip apart anything unfortunate enough to cross their path. A feeling of shock came across those watching. Flying monsters were among some of the worst-case scenarios. Any who escaped could travel far and cause untold damage to the mundane world. And Noble was the only one among them who could take to the sky. Just perfect. Bring them down and we'll finish them off, Stice called as she rose to meet the threat. The professor nodded. Even with all the firepower from the ground, there was no way that Noble could take down the incoming swarm. It was much smarter to kill the ones she could and snip the wings of countless more. Once they were on the ground, the playing field would even out considerably, at least that was the hope. Deciding against using the hammer again so soon, Noble pointed her unlikely end at the first hideous creature. Two red eyes filled with rage glared at her as the claws prepared to rip apart their prey. But the professor had seen that look in too many duelists' eyes. At the last possible moment, she shifted her trajectory, flew under the creature's clawed feet, and came up behind the abomination. She plunged the estoc right between the delicate wings, severing the creature's curved spine. You have slain an awakened monster, aerial APIs. The monster fell limply through the sky, taking two others with it as it crashed to the ground. But the queen was already on to the next abomination. Her mouth was twisted at the spell's sense of humor. Really, these things look nothing like bees. Bees are noble creatures and these things are disgusting. The last word was thought just as a vile monster's fangs managed to clamp around her forearm. The sickeningly sweet liquid pouring from its mouth tried to eat away at her armor. With her non-dominant hand, she plunged the estoc deep into one of the unblinking crimson eyes. The black body convulsed and went plummeting to the ground. Yeah, nothing like a bee, she scoffed as she shook the sticky poison from her gauntlet. In the same fluid motion, the duelist spun and snipped the wings off of the next adversary. Noble was quite thankful for the cover from the ground. Without the interference, all of the nightmare creatures would flock around her and overwhelm her thin frame. As it was, there were so many coming through the gate that they were beginning to block out what was left of the sun for those below. Bee's swift, decisive movements were barely enough to stem the tide and keep it from crashing down on the strike force's head. Using her extra sense, the queen checked on the others in her group. The awakened were holding their own, and Captain Stice and Willie even seemed to be making some headway on the ground. The former seemed to have memorized the ants' haphazard movement while the latter sliced through them like a wedge. As for the mundane fighters, they had not received the full brunt of the assault and were still able to keep their artillery firing into the horde of abominations. Pummeling the APIs and harvesters with oversized bullets was not elegant, but it was effective. As everything stood, things were looking bleak but not impossible. With awakened and dormant creatures, the humans had a fighting chance to slay them without expending too much essence. As long as things remained as they were, there might be no human bloodshed today. Noble allowed herself a flicker of hope. But then a large black spike whizzed past her head. It was so quick that Noble missed it until the wind blew her hair behind her shoulders. It landed behind her in the ground, pinning one of the armored tanks in place. Noble searched for the source of the sudden projectile. Her eyes grew wide. A new enemy had entered the killing field. Through the gate, another force marched, or rather flew forward ready to obliterate everything in sight. These creatures were similar and yet vastly different from the awakened monsters that already filled the air. Two long pairs of angular wings whizzed against the air, creating a blur of white. These abominations had 5 limbs instead of 4, each stripped with dark brown and mustard just like their rippling bodies. 4 of the limbs ended in massive scythes, ready to cut through flesh and bone without prejudice. But the 5th was arguably the most dangerous. Already another sinister black spike was growing out of its human-like palm. And something about it told Noble that it was more than just a simple javelin. The creature was far too powerful. Fallen. That thing is definitely fallen. While she was still processing what she was seeing, 2 more waspish creatures joined the swarm of bees. The blood drained from Noble's face. There was no way to fight all 3 at once. A missile exploded to her left, hitting one of the wasps in the stomach. The blast wasn't enough to wound the striped menace, but it distracted the creature long enough for Noble to attack. She dove from above, hoping to catch the creature in its blind spot. It turned out the wasp did not have one. Sensing the human bullet, the monster rolled over onto its back. 4 deadly scythes shot through the air toward the floating awakened. Noble twisted her body to one side. One of the curved blades raked against her armor, scratching the design of the polished metal. The deadly javelin shot past her through the air, missing her body by only a centimeter. She pressed the edge of her estoc forward, aiming for a seam in the creature's oversized carapace. The unlikely end hit with the full force of her speed, and glanced aside without doing any damage. Noble went crashing into the abomination. The creature was so much larger than her that her entire body hit its furry chest. Thinking quickly, she sent a wave of confusion to the fallen wasp. The action bought her just enough time to slip away before the 4 scythes could catch her in a crippling hug. Noble moved to the left and jabbed at the closest of the 4 large wings. To her relief, it seemed as delicate in the center as the api's. A small tear formed in the gossamer skin. But Noble had no time to celebrate. The center membrane of the wing might have been weak, but the edge was not. The plated tip beat down on the professor in a powerful wingbeat. The awakened went plummeting to the ground. Landing on a harvester, Bee sliced through its skull and took back to the air. I'd never thought I would be glad to land on a nightmare creature. More rockets were bursting against the fallen wasps. In response, the creatures threw their javelins at the ground. So far, the humans had managed to avoid taking too much damage, but that wouldn't last long. And once the losses started, the humans would have an even harder time stopping them. We cannot let them get that advantage. In her ascent, Noble cut off the wings of 2 more api's. One of them crashed to the ground and broke its neck while the other was trampled by the harvesters. You have slain. An explosion just above her drowned out the voice of the spell. Noble squinted against the smoke, trying to discern if the action had done any good. There. The fallen abomination had barely felt the first blast, but repeated hits had been more successful. A single crack showed where the uppermost leg met its striped abdomen. Good enough. Noble pulled the rolling thunder from her belt and held it in one hand with the estoc in the other. If her plan didn't work, the professor would put herself back in the path of the deadly scythes, and she doubted that her armor would be the only thing to suffer. It has to work. Hiding among the dissipating smoke, Noble took the rolling thunder and smashed it against the leg joint. Thankfully, the force of the blow was equated with how long the memory had been summoned and the time between blows. Just now, even the slightest tap from her would bring the full force of the hammer into the target. A shockwave of sound reverberated through the abomination's body, rattling the creature. A mundane human would have been instantly killed by the force, but this was a fallen behemoth. It withstood the blow with an angry growl. Lifting the uppermost leg, the creature aimed to cut off the pretty brunette's head. You don't want to do that. The creature hissed as the crack in the joint widened. Spinning, Bee hit the wasp a second time with the hammer. While not as mighty as the first strike, the blow did not need to be. It merely needed to finish the process that had already begun. Under the sonic shockwave, the carapace gave way, shearing off the leg from the striped abdomen. Noble was ready. Having already dismissed the hammer, she gripped the estoc and sent essence flooding into the unlikely end. The sword sank into the open wound and dug deep into the creature's chest cavity. The monster convulsed as the red light faded from its eyes. You have slain a fallen monster, winged warrior. From the outside, the movement had been purposeful and effortless, but inside Noble's heart was pounding. Taking down the warrior had required an enormous amount of luck and skill. And that was just one of them. There were at least 2 others, possibly more in the time it had taken her to wrestle down the single foe. Using the combination of her abilities, she stretched out her senses to find the next one. Her eyes opened wide. Watch out! Noble had no idea who had screamed or if they were even screaming at her, but the warning for her was a moment too late. Hardly had she identified the javelin barreling towards her than it was already upon her. She had just enough time to turn such that the javelin hit her side and slid off instead of piercing her square in the back. That is not to say it didn't hurt. Arg, I think I broke a few ribs. Noble could immediately feel her breathing become labored, and the attack was only beginning. In addition to the warrior, dozens of the APIs began swarming around her, warming the air. She fended them off as best she could, stabbing and winging as many as she was able. But the temperature continued to rise. Noble avoided another of the stinger-like javelins, kicking it just enough to skewer 3 of the APIs and give her a moment of fresh air. But the respite was too brief. Noble lost all sense of direction. If not for her hair falling across her face or shoulders, she wasn't even sure if she would be able to know which way was down. All that mattered at the moment was staying alive and taking out as many of the nightmare creatures as she could. Both tasks were becoming increasingly more difficult. Can't breathe. The combination of the heat in her aching ribs was making her feel dizzy. Get back. She used as much of her ability as she could to push away all of the creatures around her as she gasped for breath. The swarm pulsed outward with a feverish buzz, ready to resume their suffocating attack. Only they didn't. All at once they flew as fast as they could away from Noble and toward the gate. A moment later the professor realized why. Her blood ran cold. The gate guardian had arrived. On the one hand, this was good news for humanity. It was only a Category 2 gate, the most common and most manageable kind of opening. On the other hand, that meant Noble and the rest of the strike force were about to face off against the most formidable force the gate had to offer. What was so terrible that even fallen creatures flitted to welcome it with anticipation? Noble was about to find out. The quality of the air changed. At first, it was cooling, but then it felt almost frigid. Cold in the middle of summer. That can't be good. The void rippled, as if unable to expel the guardian into the world. Below, what was left of the harvesters formed a ring to await their leader. Noble surveyed the situation below. A couple of the awakened were unaccounted for, and at least 10 of the larger military vehicles were no longer operational. There was nothing she could do about it. Finally, the guardian broke through into the waking world. Or at least its front leg did. It was thicker than a sewage pipe and just as straight until it bent at a right angle at the knee. There it met the other 3 like the spokes of a wheel. Next entered its corkscrew torso, with 2 metal spheres for hands. A deformed head sat atop the wide shoulders, covered in netting which obscured a grotesque face. The nightmare creature was more than 7 meters tall. Noble felt oppressed to even be in its presence. The other monsters seemed like gnats by comparison. Crawling out on the pavement, the guardian planted its feet firmly on the ground. Already, missiles, artillery, and every manner of weapon were pelting the metal legs with little to no effect. The winged warriors and sinister APIs spun around their leader in a frenzy, some knocking out each other in the chaos. In answer to the buzzing, smoke emanated from the guardian's hands, entrancing the creatures into doing their leader's bidding. It was bad enough when the flying creatures were all working cooperatively. Now that they seemed to share one mind, they would become that much more dangerous. Noble summoned that rolling thunder and clipped it to her belt. Since she had dismissed it, the memory would need some time before returning to full strength. Until then, I have to be as quick as possible. The professor's eyes narrowed in determination. Charting her path, she darted forward just as the bees made their first move. Blurs of black, gold, and brown filled the sky, each intent on destruction. Estoc in hand, she sliced as many wings, legs, and heads as she could manage while avoiding their deadly reach. It was a delicate game of threading the needle. The creatures were fast, but Noble was faster, at least for now. Reaching the guardian, Noble aimed for one of the 2 balls of billowing smoke. The metal hands were porous, and Noble hoped she could at least cause the creature a bit of pain. So far it had not moved except to crawl into the world. If she could find the creature's weak spot, perhaps she could end it before any more damage was done. The professor had 3 theories on where this weak point might be. Awakened were already attacking one of them. Since no one else could fly, Captain Stice and a few others were pelting underneath the guardian at the nexus of its legs. Willie had managed to make a small dent in the creature's undercarriage, making the whole metallic body creak. The other 2 places were out of the soldiers' reach, and Noble made it her goal to attack each as soon as possible. With that aim in mind, she plunged the estoc deep into the abomination's hand. A metallic groan resonated through the creature's massive body. The 2 outstretched arms began to move, spinning slowly around the torso. Noble got out of the way, trying to figure out if her attack had made any difference. Is it growing taller? The slow spin continued, confusing the professor as she fended off the swarm of APIs. A javelin sang past her. In a moment of clarity, she redirected the spike to her next target, the guardian's face. Unlike the rest of the rigid body, the netting surrounding the face seemed pliable. And a fallen spike would put that flexibility to the test. The javelin tore into the fabric and hit the guardian's cheek. The head turned, accompanied by an angry ratcheting sound. A single unblinking eye looked at Noble. Its octagonal shape was lit internally with a dastardly green flame. Noble shuddered. It was clear now, the gate guardian was indeed growing taller. It was currently over 9 meters. Pretty soon it would be taller than the office buildings which lined the street. The most unnerving thing about the creature was how unbothered it seemed by all the chaos going on around it. It was being attacked from all sides, yet continued its spinning with rhythmic clicking. With the netting torn, it was clear that the head was spinning around too, making it unclear which way the guardian would go if it finally decided to move. When it decides to move, Noble corrected her thinking. The professor could feel the unwavering rage pulsing from the guardian with each ominous click. Perhaps it was waiting for all of its minions to be destroyed before it put forth any effort. As more and more of the dormant and awakened creatures were destroyed, the smoke began to dissipate. It was a small blessing that the entrancing fog didn't seem to be affecting the professor. The mind attack only worked on those who were already deranged, it seemed. Noble tried to disrupt the connection with an attack of her own. While she finished off 2 of the APIs with a single swing, she funneled her emotion toward the gate guardian. Anger, fear, frustration, all of the emotions seemed to only feed the ever-growing tower. She took a deep breath as she stabbed through yet another carapace of a demented bee. You have slain. None of those worked, think. Her mind unconsciously went to those she was protecting. Below were people who had loved ones. They were fighting and she should give it her all for their sake. She felt a tingle as her mind thought about love. She was still connected to the guardian, and it did not like that sensation at all. Latching on to the hesitation, Noble pushed as much care and concern into the guardian as she could. The hold that the massive monster had on its minions broke. Disoriented, weaker creatures shivered as if waking from sleep. For 4 precious seconds, the mundane soldiers of the strike force were able to mow down scores of dazed abominations. But that was all the time they got. The guardian severed the connection, making Noble feel like she had lost part of herself in the process. Her mind burned from the exertion. It was worth the pain. The humans were finally gaining the upper hand. All but a few of the first 2 waves had been obliterated, allowing more and more of the team to focus on the menacing guardian. The strange creature ratcheted ever upwards, growing taller than the buildings around it. Just when Noble thought it would break in the center from the strain, the terrifying clicking came to a sudden stop. The guardian froze for a moment. Then the world began to shatter. Stark realization hit Noble. The creature hadn't been sitting idly by as it corkscrewed to the sky. It had been biding its time to let its prey come to it. As more and more of the minions were destroyed, the bulk of the human army drew close to the guardian to attack it with their full force. Willie was making small dents in the legs while the captain and his forces were trying to penetrate the underbelly. With so many underneath the behemoth, the guardian was finally in a position to deal a devastating attack. And the creature knew it. Get out, Noble screamed as she flew downward. It's a trap. Just then the mechanical clicking ceased. The legs extended into a flat line as the full weight of the monster crashed against the earth. The asphalt underneath was pulverized into fine dust while the awakened warriors and mundane humans fled from the creature's hulking form. And not a moment too soon. The corkscrew body began to descend, only this time it was the head and arms that remained still. The legs began to spin. Like blades of a windmill, the 4 pipes whirred to life and dug into the dirt below. The earth crumbled under the force, creating a hole that pulled everything toward it like a magnet. The ground shook, and the buildings around them collapsed into the chasm. Noble watched in horror. Frantically, she lifted many of the human soldiers from the falling debris. After rescuing people on the train and trying to attack the Guardian's mind, her reserve of essence was becoming strained, but as long as she had any left, she would continue to rescue people and move them to safety. The destruction of the city continued until the head, arms, and base had no space between them. By then the creature was so deep in the ground that it was hard to see. The strike force neared the hole and began shooting their ammunition into it. If the thing burrowed sideways, it would be virtually undetectable until it surfaced again. Captain, tell them to aim for the eye if they can. It's the only weak spot I found. Noble came close to the soldiers. You heard Queen Bee, aim for the eye. Stice pulled out an enchanted bow and began raining fiery arrows into the hole. One exploded close to the broken netting, irritating the Guardian and widening the hole around its face. What a powerful memory. Noble resisted her urge to guess its rank and class. It's coming back, someone screamed, rising back up on its legs. The monster began to scale the wall in an effortless vertical climb. Before long it would be out of the hole and back in the city. They only had a moment to act. Give it all you have got. Stice continued to shoot arrows with blinding speed. Dismissing the S-stock, Noble summoned a small single-use memory. The heat of battle had been something she purchased for a research paper to compare to the forbidden fruit. Can you hit this with your arrow? Noble asked the captain. Stice gave a short nod as he knocked another arrow. While the trinket was still manifesting, Noble tossed it at the creature's head. The memory wasn't incredibly powerful, but it had the insidious ability to continue to burn despite any effort to put it out. And Stice's arrow was the perfect match to light the candle. The heat of battle collided with the netting on the monster's head right when the arrow pierced it. A burst of fire fizzled into smoldering embers, eating away at the netting, and exposing the single crystal eye. Noble's heart leapt when she saw what the singed edges revealed. The eye had a scratch. In front of the verdant burning flame, an almost imperceptible scuff had formed along the crystal surface. Fall back, Stice called as the creature neared the surface. But Noble ignored him. Grabbing the hammer from her side, she dove into the hole. Just a little closer, the professor pressed into her speed. The hammer collided with the eye, releasing an ear-splitting roll of thunder. The surface of the eye shuddered, but Noble was too close to notice the tremor. All she could see was the small crack forming across the surface of the eye. Yes, a blast of green fire shot through the crack. Noble barely had time to pull her gauntlet away from the mystical blaze. Her hammer was not so lucky. Your memory has been destroyed. Oh no, she lamented silently. Her eyes widened. Oh no, in the mayhem, the monster had not ceased its upward climb. To avoid another hit by the awakened, it had turned its head, which sent the molten net right at Bee. Bee fled, her sabaton brushing up against the burning cord. She exited the hole just before the monster breached the surface once more. The large hands stopped smoking, curving to take out Noble with a large swipe. Thankfully, she was already out of reach. Rather than chase after the humans, the Guardian selected a new spot, froze, and began its upward climb once more. It would destroy the world one hole at a time until nothing was left. There's a crack on the eye, Noble told the captain. Right in the center. That's good news, Stice nodded. Aim all firepower toward the middle of the eye. The strike team adjusted their aim, but as soon as they did, the creature turned its face away from them and held it there. The man clutched his bow. That blasted thing can turn completely around. We can never keep pace with it. Put this around your ear. Noble handed Stice half of the other's voice. I'll get him looking your way. Just be ready. The captain's eyes opened slightly at the voice in his mind. Understood. Queen Bee took off towards the creature. Already it was beginning to tower as high as the office next to it. Noble tried to think. Without that rolling thunder, the professor did not think that she had a memory strong enough to attack the monster head-on. And she was wary of doing so. Another centimeter last time and she would have ended up just like the heroic hammer. Those arms can move more than I thought. I have to watch out for them too. The two spheres had proven that they could do more than just spin. They could twist and turn at will to pummel her. I need a distraction, something big enough to force that creature to pay attention. Looking around, most everything was in ruins or still attached to the ground. She thought about lifting an overturned PTV, but as soon as she tried, it cracked into two. It wasn't big enough anyway, she consoled herself. What she needed had to be large enough for the Guardian to turn to block it. Not even the missiles being shot at its legs were drawing any kind of notice. Noble continued to scan. At last, she spotted something that would work. A strange smile formed on her face as a sigh escaped her lips. Looks like I have a train to catch. The light rail track was one of the few things left standing after the earthquake from the Guardian's tunneling. Its flexible nature made it resist the pull of the shaking and remained towering over the rubble below. And on the rail, a train was heading toward the chaos. Using her abilities, Noble scanned the cars. No one is on there. No one is on where? A voice answered. Don't worry about it, the professor responded. She hadn't meant to send the communication to the captain. Are you ready? We're in place. Stice's voice was full of resolve. Good. On my mark. B examined where the humans were positioned and then scanned the train a second time. It was indeed empty. Most likely, all of the people had been evacuated at the last stop and the train had continued automatically without a driver. The professor breathed a sigh of relief. She did not have time to make a rescue and complete her task. Thankfully she would not have to choose. With only a few seconds left to plan, Noble positioned herself close to, but out of reach of, the spinning gate guardian. She found it much easier to bring things toward her than to aim them away, and this would be a happy medium between the two. The aim didn't need to be perfect. Noble's goal was simply to annoy the creature into looking their way. You can do this. Beads of sweat formed on her brow as she pushed away the doubt. Other than correcting the train car months before, she had never tried to lift anything so large. You aren't lifting it, you are guiding it. Noble shielded her thoughts from the captain as she steadied her nerves. The train would go flying when it hit the top of the ramp anyway. She would merely be giving it a little lift and push in the most helpful direction. Get ready. 3, 2, 1. Incoming. Unmanned and unbridled, the light rail came careening down the tracks even faster than expected. Noble's eyes swirled as she used the last of her essence to boost the train and send it flying toward the growing monster. Over here, she screamed, adding to the noise of the groaning train. The green eye spun to glare at the attack. Mundane metal could not harm it, no matter how fast it was going. Keep looking at it just a little longer. From the ground, projectiles of all shapes and sizes aimed toward the sinister green glare. But it was a fiery arrow that landed the punch. The glass of the eye shattered, revealing the furnace inside. As soon as they were able to douse the flames, the creature would likely be vanquished. The end was in sight. We are so close. Just one more minute and Noble was certain they would finish the battle once and for all. But the Guardian was not through. While spinning, it reached out with one of its orb-like hands and melded around the train. The arm suddenly extended, the other shortening in equal measure. The single longer limb gripped the light rail, swinging the train like a whip through the air. Queen Bee, look out. Stice blasted the warning into her mind. Noble had placed herself out of the reach of the monster, but she had not anticipated the creature was able to lengthen one arm by adjusting the other. By the time she realized what was happening, it was too late. The ball crashed into her body, pushing her armor to its limit. The impact would have disintegrated a mundane human, but somehow her body held together. The massive arm continued to push her through the air, forcing her toward the last place she wanted to go. The gate. I'm going to hit it. Whether or not Noble would be able to avoid being sandwiched between the gate and the fist did not matter. For every awakened knew what happened when they came in contact with a gate. It was like hitting an electrified wall. She would feel pain, immeasurable pain. There was no way to remain cognizant with that kind of agony. Either Noble would perish from the shock, or she would be rendered unconscious. If the latter, then her flaw would take over, forcing her into the sky until either lack of oxygen or the extreme cold finished her off. Or a rogue nightmare creature ate her. Crippling fear gripped her. I'm about to die. All she could do was brace herself and hope the death was mercifully brief. The gate neared. Noble closed her eyes. This was it. But then, nothing. No, that wasn't exactly true. Her skin began to tingle as something very warm pressed against her torso. When she opened her eyes, something was glowing darkly through her breastplate. The key. Noble had stowed the portcullis key inside her armor when she had made the daring train rescue. She now realized that she had never actually dismissed it. The professor spun around, astonished at the scene. The massive arm had hit against the gate, but somehow she had passed through. The rift was now framing the waking world like a window. Fear. Her fear had triggered the ball into permeating the barrier. Noble had done the impossible. All she needed to do now was exit the gate like the nightmare creatures and re-enter the battle. Although from the look of things, the creature is already dead. Indeed, the fiery light was extinguished from its eye. We won. Noble did not dare believe it. Anxiety welled up inside her as she longed to confirm that it was true. Except the professor couldn't stop moving away from the gate. An invisible tether seemed tied to her waist as the ball glowed more intensely. The waking world faded until the darkness fully enveloped her. Awakened. Prepare for your second trial. What? Noble had fallen into a gate, not entered a seed. Just how many barriers had the portcullis key breached? One lone challenger. Welcome to the nightmare. No, 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 no. The word reverberated in Noble's head 1,000 times. This couldn't be happening. This had to be a bad dream. Not a nightmare. She had to get home. To have dinner with her family. They were expecting her to walk through the door any moment. Noble didn't have time to conquer a nightmare. Not that she even could alone. She wasn't Lady Changing Star. She was an academy professor for spell's sake. She had survived a collision with the gate only to face an even more harrowing end. Noble thought of her husband. They were supposed to grow old together. A commendation for bravery from the Chancellor would be poor compensation for Fort's broken heart. She thought of her boys. Brock needed help with math homework this evening. His grades would suffer. And Blaze had been telling her about a girl he thought was cute. Noble had meant to follow up on that lead. The professor thought of her messy home, her classroom, and even her place in Ender's Deep. She had finally found a way to hang the colorful glass teardrop in a way that made her room sparkle. Now she would never get to enjoy the fruit of her labor. Noble longed to be in any of those places. Anywhere but here. Her mind jumped to her daughter. Noble had promised the girl that she would come clean tonight about everything. Another promise she would break. Guilt filled her as a muffled sob escaped her lips. Noble called out to her daughter, so desperate for her to hear that she used the name that the girl was given at birth. I'm sorry, Rain. I'm so sorry. That was all she could manage before the darkness faded. The world opened up before Noble. Slowly, time moved backward. Her nightmare began. Shaking her head, Noble let out a gut-wrenching scream. This can't be happening. It had to be a mistake. Some cruel joke. Noble had not chosen to enter a seed. Get me out of here. The professor closed her eyes and willed herself to escape. She had more than enough fear to fuel the key just now. So why couldn't she leave? Only a fool allows himself to be denied entrance. Noble remembered the runes. What about an exit? She had been able to enter and leave the train without issue. It seemed that the nightmare seed was only a one-way trip. For no matter how hard she tried, Noble stayed firmly in place above the world as it moved in reverse. By the time the professor opened her eyes and accepted that she was stuck, the reversal was nearly complete. However it had started, the earth below was now lush and green. A palace stood in the distance surrounded by a magnificent city. Mountains of ash and snow loomed far off in the distance, partially obscured by dark clouds. If she had entered the seed from inside the dream realm, Noble might have had some clue as to her location. But without any context, the professor wasn't sure what landmarks to even look for. Depending on the time where she was, the landscape could have changed dramatically. That was assuming it had ever been mapped by humans at all. Until a few years ago, the Forgotten Shore was previously uncharted territory. This place could be as well. Not that it mattered. Surviving a second nightmare alone was nearly impossible. And Noble was not Changing Star. The world came to a halt, and then the sun began moving in the correct direction. With the change, Noble began her descent toward the ground. Where in the city would she land? Suddenly self-conscious, the professor looked down at herself. Her body had come with her, but she had not thought to check on its state. Thankfully, Noble was still wearing her armor. The dents and scratches were gone and the metal brilliantly reflected the afternoon sun. Noble grunted as she tried to access her ability. Just like she hadn't been able to move in the presentation of the nightmare, she could not control the angle or speed of her descent. It was terrifying, not having control. The spell was pulling her toward the ground at a frightening speed. Was it going to plunge her into the earth and kill her from the impact? Surely not, and yet, the pressure did not let up even as she neared the verdant grass. Hitting the earth, Noble screamed. Her body felt like it was being pulled into a million pieces. If not for the mild tolerance she had built up to fight the pain, the awakened would have passed out instantly. As it was, her soul felt like it was being shredded. Her legs convulsed, propelling her from the ground and into the air as she continued to cry out in agony. Stupid spell. It took everything in Noble not to lose control of her emotions and succumb to the torment in her soul. You had twins, remember? This pain is nothing, just breathe. Floating above the body-sized divot, she began to practice the breathing she had learned to handle pain during labor. Deep, cleansing breaths. While the intake of oxygen did not take away the pain, it did help Noble clear her mind and calm her nerves. Push through. Everything is fine. You are alive and outside the city. Wait, outside the city? The realization confused her, but as her vision became more focused, Noble confirmed that this was true. The spell had dropped her outside of the magnificent white walls. That was just as well. Making a small crater in a house would not have gotten her off on the right foot with the locals. Dismissing her fraudulent facade, Noble evaluated her situation. I need to get into the city and find out where I am, she said through gritted teeth. Her misery lessened the longer she stood still. In theory, Noble could wait there in the peaceful evening light and let the pain sift out of her soul before she went in search of whatever problem this nightmare might hold. But she had no idea where the gate was to the city nor if it closed when the sun went down. Noble didn't like the idea of being stranded outside at night. Sure, she could fly over the wall, but without knowing anything about the people or the culture, it seemed wisest not to show her ability unless it was absolutely necessary. For all she knew, these people were the enemy she needed to vanquish to resolve the nightmare. I hope not. I am not sure if fighting people would be better or worse than a horde of nightmare creatures. People are smart, but creatures can be horrible, terrible things, creatures like that one. Noble's heart, which had begun to quiet, again beat wildly in her chest. In the field between Noble and the city was a harrowing beast. It was as tall as her with broad, muscular shoulders. Thick, lustrous fur framed its face and large fanged mouth. Lumbering forward on 4 stocky legs, the thing could easily swallow her in 2 bites without even needing to chew. Maybe it doesn't see me. Noble's hopes were crushed before she had even completed the thought. 2 dark, intelligent eyes stopped roving the landscape and locked with hers. Not good. In addition to the pain in her soul and body from touching the ground, the mental fatigue after the fight at the gate and the unexpected entry into a nightmare was still clouding her consciousness. The professor did not have it in her to fight, which left one option: flee. But before Noble could put her grand plan into action, the beast suddenly increased its speed. In a flash, it was upon her, and she barely escaped the creature's front claws as they tried to close around her torso. She took to the air, but the beast was unwilling to give up. It leapt after her, taking hold of her leg and pulling her back to the earth. The professor struggled against it, hoping against hope that she had the strength to keep both herself and the monster in the air long enough for her estoc to materialize. Noble had lifted a train earlier today. Surely a monster was easy by comparison. But the professor had only been guiding the light rail back then. This monster was much denser and actively struggling against her flight. She barely had enough essence to summon her faithful blade. Not that it mattered. Before the unlikely end had even fully manifested, the creature's long tail wrapped around it and pulled the blade from her grasp. With a flick, it tossed the weapon aside. No, the monster released a menacing growl. Noble flailed, but she could already feel that her flight was lessening under the weight of the monster. And the creature's grasp only became more firm. I'm done for. Her peripheral vision caught a glimpse of a shadow about the same time she became aware of another set of emotions beyond her own. Help, please, she begged the stranger who was running toward her. He had a bow in his hand, and his muscular build spoke of his imposing strength. One shot from his arrow would surely at least distract the creature enough to let her go. Only the man didn't raise his weapon. When he came close, he leaned on his bow and smiled in a way that made Noble intensely uncomfortable. There you are, he said. Looks like Kosi finally caught his prey. Noble's mind spun at what she had just heard. Not only was the man unwilling to help her, he was working with the beast. Prey. Noble's throat went dry. You were hunting me. The man brushed back the sandy hair from his forehead as his expression darkened. We have been on your trail since right after you left the palace. You didn't make it easy. A couple of more minutes and you might have slipped away forever. Quote, did he say palace? Was she a runaway slave? A royal prisoner headed for the gallows? Things must have been dire for her to need to flee. Exactly who was the person whose place she had taken? Please, Noble managed. Let me go. The man's stern expression faded as a smile split his face. So serious, my lady. Kosi is just a little unhappy that you tried to leave again without him. You injured his pride, but I am sure he will forgive you like he always does." The young man released a low whistle and Kosi released the professor. Relieved, she lowered to the ground next to the golden-haired creature and received a lick from his rough pink tongue. Kosi emanated a sound between a growl and a purr, forcing a smile onto Noble's face. Now that she wasn't in fear of being eaten, the floating awakened got a real look at the ferocious hunter. Kosi was halfway between what would have been considered a cat and dog back on Earth, though many times larger, and his dark eyes looked as proud as they did innocent. A noble creature. The professor reached out and ran her fingers through Kosi's mane before scratching behind his ear. "One of the best, though quite the little demon when he wants to be. And you seem to have taught him a new trick. I've never seen him hold someone up in the air like that. You must have given him extra trouble this time." The man was clearly questioning what he had seen. "Yeah, that was quite something. For a moment I really thought he was going to get me." Noble coughed lightly and looked away. "He was born to protect you, my lady. I do not think he would go against that, even for me. Isn't that right?" The man, Noble still did not know his name, waited for Kosi to answer his query. The creature whined softly. "He says that he would rather not have to choose, but that he will take your secrets to his grave." The man chuckled softly. "Like there are any secrets you would give him but not me." "Did he just?" "He did. He can communicate with the beast." Noble could sense that the man was an awakened, but the ability to talk and commune with creatures in such a way was still impressive. There weren't many animals left to talk to in the waking world if it could even be done with mundane animals at all. But here, there were at least some noble creatures worth the communication. Kosi in particular, who was rubbing against her outstretched hand, was gaining her affection rather quickly. "He is supposed to protect me. No wonder he hugged my leg instead of digging his claws into my armor." Would this furry demon be a long-term ally? She certainly hoped so, assuming there was a long-term in this strange place. Noble still had to survive the initial stage of figuring out what in the world was going on. And the man in front of her was a good place to start. He was clad in a breastplate on his chest and a loose-fitting tunic around his waist and legs. He handled the bow in his hands comfortably. A soldier or a hunter? Noble turned the options over in her mind. Despite her trying to hide her curiosity, the man caught her furtive gaze. He tilted his head and studied her as well. "Where did you get this armor? I have not seen you wear it before." "What? Oh." Noble looked down at her black and gold gauntlets. Clearly whoever she had taken the place of would not have owned Bee's armor. "I have had it a long time," she answered vaguely. "Another of the gifts in your mother's treasure trove, I suppose." The man took a step closer and bent to study her sabbatins. Noble remained quiet. It was a trick she had learned from her father. When Lance didn't know something, he would remain silent whenever possible to let people fill in the details which they assumed he already knew. The handsome man with the bow nodded slowly, his face contemplative. Lady Alora always did have the best things. She was well loved by all. He paused. "Forgive me, does it hurt to speak of her?" "No, please continue." Noble leaned against Kosi's fur. His warmth soothed her skin and her spirit. "Ah, I don't have much more to say on the subject except I was honored to know her and your father. Lord Bizes and Lady Alora were such brave champions for our kingdom." The man felt a mix of respect, guilt, and regret as he said those words. He sighed. "I only hope I can protect their most precious legacy in a way that honors their sacrifice." His eyes met hers, and what the professor saw in them sent a new kind of fear down her spine. Noble had already figured out that the man was not her brother. His mention of Lady Alora as her mother and not their mother was proof of that. The way he had called her, "my lady," twice held deep loyalty underneath it. But when he looked at her just now there was no mistaking the expression. It was an expression of longing. Noble quickly checked his hands and arms for any sign of a band or marking that might confirm or deny her fear. Though not all cultures had tokens of marriage, many if not most had some indication of that status. The man had no such marking. But that did not stop his hand from reaching for hers. "My lady, that is to say, Lady Brenna." "Oh no." She took a step away, pulling her hand from his grasp. The hair on the back of Kosi's neck stood on end. He growled, showing his long fangs to the man. The stranger shot the creature an angry glare. "I wasn't going to hurt her, you foolish Simkus." His eyes roved back to Noble. "I was about to. My heart belongs to another," Noble blurted. The other awakened stared at her for a long moment. His face searched hers, and she looked back at him without blinking. Noble was married, and nightmare or not, that would not change. The stranger needed to see she meant business. A cloud passed across his face before his more carefree mask fell back in place. I had no idea you had taken a lover. Is that why you keep running away? To meet him, the man sounded jovial, but she could sense him smothering his true feelings. Perhaps in the distant past when this really occurred, the couple had married and lived happily together. Had Noble already set the nightmare on a different path? She would contemplate that later. For now, what mattered was making sure the man before her would still help her. I'm sorry. Noble did not want someone, even a copy of someone long dead, to be sad on her account. What are you sorry for, my lady? I am your humble servant as always. Do not worry, your secret is safe with me. But we must head back. You can run away another day with the one who has your heart. Her Majesty sent me to fetch you for dinner. As you know, Her Majesty must always be obeyed. Of course, Noble didn't feel like she had much choice. But there was something very wrong in the way that her companion said, Her Majesty. Was that who the real Brenna had been running from? Noble was about to find out. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.